I thought I had mostly covered everybody in the hate groups video, but while researching for this video, I found this guy, part of this neo-Nazi organization, and this was his mugshot. It's eerily similar to somebody we know. More recently, if you've kept up with the news, there was this kid, Nikita Kasab, who identified himself as a follower of the Order of the Nine Angles, who killed his mother and father and planned to assassinate Donald Trump in order to save the white race. There was a mass shooting at FSU committed by Phoenix Eichner, who, according to USA Today and interviews of his colleagues, had a history of espousing right-wing conspiracy theories and hateful ideas, and also had an online account named after the Schutzstaffel, or SS military group. Not only this, but while the details of the murder of Hunter Metcalf remain the subject of national debate, pending investigations of course, what's undeniable is how quickly this tragedy was weaponized, not by justice seekers, but by extremists. Jacob Lang, a January 6th rioter who was facing federal charges for assaulting an officer on video before being pardoned by Donald Trump, organized what he called a Protect White People rally. There, attendees, including skinheads and neo-Nazis, waved flags of groups that we're going to talk about today, carried signs parroting conspiracy theories, and promoted Gab, which is a website we've also talked about, where, of course, free speech is legal, which you know what that means. And at this event, they even confronted the victim's father on the phone. Hunter Metcalf's father denounced them, begging them to stop using his son's face to push their movement, and he even told them that they're what's wrong with the world. And in return, they called him weak.
Would you be willing to stand by me in a press conference or in an individual interview and talk about this issue that is larger than Austin at this point? God rest the beautiful young man's soul that would have been one of our strongest voices if he was still alive today.
Are you done?
Yes, I am, sir.
Okay, my turn to speak. You are part of the problem, my friend. You're trying to create more race divide than bridging the gap. I do not condone anything you do. You do not have any...
That's called white guilt.
No, let it talk.
My son, let me finish. I gave you your time. You take my son's face off your website. I am not associated with you.
You're creating more Austin Metcalfs with your weakness, sir. You are creating more Austin Metcalfs with your weakness.
You are being weak. I gotta be honest with you about that, sir.
You're being weak. Condemn your son's killer and the culture that caused it.
Hey, Jeff.
That's the problem. You've been submitted.
Hold on, hey, Jeff.
You've been submitted.
I'll handle it from here.
You've been submitted, sir.
And it's not just people on the right weaponizing his death. I've seen actual memes and jokes made about a dead child. And when they get called out, the response is always some hollow deflection like, well, people still make memes about George Floyd, which, yes, is true, but why even stoop to this level? You don't fight racism with racism, and you don't fight being a piece of shit by being a piece of shit. The world is full of soulless people, and nothing emphasizes this more recent than the footage that arose of an FSU student casually walking past the body of one of the mass shooting victims, filming it while sipping on coffee. Like, what the fuck, man? And I know I'm ranting, but the point I'm trying to get across is that it's up to people like me and you to not stoop to the levels of either side of this and become pieces of shit. That's why we learn. That's why I make videos like this, because understanding history is the only thing keeping us from slipping any further and hopefully avoiding repeating mistakes. That's why you learn history, so you don't repeat it. So why is it that people still adhere to Nazism? I mean, the Nazis, they lost the war, right? Well, yes, they did. And so did the Confederates, but I can tell you living and growing up in Georgia that I could go drive around right now for a couple miles and still see Confederate flags planted in people's front yards. And as a black man, I've literally heard the words, listen, there's a difference between niggers and black people. Anyone can be a nigger, but when it comes to black people, you're one of the good ones. Yeah. So yeah, both sides lost, but the ideology never really died. It just changed clothes. So let's break it down and trace where it came from and how it spread. And I don't know what it's like in other countries, but Nazism is a very interesting subject here in the US. You can cosplay as Hitler, get kicked out of the military, be arrested for committing acts of domestic terrorism and assault, and then be pardoned for it. And if he didn't have to make it more clear, like we talked about in the gang signs video, this hand sign does not mean okay, it doesn't mean, yeah, things are great. This means white power. Yeah. So anytime you see anyone throwing this up in the video or in relation to anything about neo-Nazis, it means, yeah, man, WP, white power. Yeah, brother. Anyways, we have a lot of history to talk about and a little over 100 groups to cover, so let's get into it. So, Germany in the 1920s was a nation in crisis. They were humiliated by World War I, ravaged by economic turmoil, and desperate for hope. Into this chaos would step Adolf Hitler, as we've talked about many times before, and his Nazi party, offering scapegoats and certainty for the country. What began as a fringe extremist group would swell into a mass movement by the early 1930s, and in 1933, Hitler would officially seize power and swiftly dismantled German democracy, establishing the Third Reich, a totalitarian Nazi regime that ruled through fear and force until their defeat in 1945. Under Nazi rule, dissent was completely crushed, and Germany weaponized itself for conquest. Hitler's war machine would soon plunge Europe into the Second World War and unleashed unprecedented horrors, including the genocide of millions in the Holocaust. At its core, Nazism was an ideology of racial supremacy, authoritarianism, and anti-Semitism. The Nazis preached that the Aryan, or Nordic Germanic people, were a master race destined to rule. They viewed Jews, along with Roma, Slavs, Black people, disabled, LGBTQ+, and other minorities as subhuman threats to Aryan purity. Hitler's government rejected every ideal of liberal democracy and human rights, insisting instead on absolute obedience to a single infallible leader. Individual freedom meant nothing, only the blood and soil of the German Volk mattered. The Nazi doctrine glorified violence and conquest, that being the right of the strong to dominate the weak, and the need to purge undesirables from society, especially the Jewish people. This fanatical creed led directly to the Holocaust, which was the systematic murder of over 6 million Jews and the mass slaughter of countless others deemed enemies of the Reich. And simply put, the Nazis were masters of propaganda, staging fiery torchlit parades and stadium rallies to awe the public, and everywhere the media would pump out fear and bigotry. Jews were demonized as alien and parasitic, blamed for Germany's ills, and there were actual board games made for children to consume this type of hate. Now, all this had an enormous effect, as they made prejudice and violence seem not only acceptable, but righteous. Through posters, radios, films, and schools, Nazi propaganda turned hate into a national religion. Under this barrage of indoctrination, ordinary Germans saluted Hitler like a messiah, and even children learned to chant anti-Semitic slogans among the Hitler youth. And the swastika banner would become a hypnotic emblem of a hateful new order. However, when the Third Reich finally fell in 1945, its cities would lay in ruins and its leaders would face judgment. But the end of Nazi Germany did not extinguish Nazi beliefs. In the war's aftermath, many die-hard Nazis slipped away into the shadows instead of surrendering their ideology. You'd have things like Operation Paperclip and Operation Bloodstone, whereby the United States government would bring in thousands of German scientists, engineers, and technicians to the United States after World War II between 1945 and 1959. Many of which were actually affiliated with the Nazis. These programs aimed to acquire German technical knowledge and expertise to aid the US during the Cold War, particularly in areas like rocketry and missile development. And you'd have people like Wernher von Braun, who went from making rockets for the Nazis to making rockets for NASA. In occupied Germany, Allied forces, of course, outlawed Nazi organizations and symbols, as even displaying a swastika was completely banned. Yet the embers of Hitler's creed would still smolder in hidden corners of the world. And over the following decades, Nazism would mutate into dispersed neo-Nazi movements operating in many countries. No longer a single nation's regime, neo-Nazism would become an underground global phenomenon with organized networks spanning international borders. From Europe to the Americas, small extremist groups and subcultures would emerge, all devoted to reviving Hitler's vision. They adopted the characteristics of the Third Reich, including swastikas, Hitler salutes, and SS insignia, as powerful tokens of defiance and allegiance. In secret meetings and pamphlets, they would praise Adolf Hitler as a fallen hero and denied the truth of his crimes, and Holocaust denial would become a common doctrine among neo-Nazis, as they brazenly dismissed the genocide of Jews as a hoax or exaggeration. And even as governments outlawed Nazi symbols and hate speech, the swastika continued to surface, spray painted on walls, tattooed on skin, or hidden in extremist literature, a lingering reminder that the Nazi ideology was not fully dead. As decades would pass, the world hoped Nazi ideology would remain marginalized, but with the rise of the internet, neo-Nazism found new and potent life. The digital age created fresh battlefields for the war of ideas, where hate could spread at the speed of a click. By the mid-1990s, white supremacists and neo-Nazis were already establishing online bulletin boards and websites to connect with like-minded bigots across the world. The cyberspace provided anonymity and global reach, allowing extremist propaganda to proliferate beyond the control of any one government. And what was once whispered in secret or distributed in photocopied tracks could now be blasted to millions on forums and social media. In the 21st century, anonymous image boards and forums will become breeding grounds for resurgence of Nazi-style extremism. Websites like 4chan, the infamous Anything Goes message board, would turn into incubators of radicalization. Alt-right and neo-Nazi agitators used these sites and their offshoots as recruitment tools, luring disaffected youth with edgy humor that gradually gave way to hardcore hate. It was here where swastikas and Hitler memes would intermingle with ironic catchphrases, cultivating an atmosphere where racism and anti-Semitism would thrive under the guise of free speech. Virtual communities of hate that once would have been isolated are now able to reinforce each other internationally, creating an echo chamber that normalizes extremist violence and bigotry. However, the notorious forums themselves are not invulnerable, as in an ironic twist of fate. Just days ago, 4chan was rocked by a massive breach as hackers infiltrated the site, allegedly stealing its source code, internal logs, and user information. The attack temporarily knocked 4chan offline, and it remains offline to this day. However, we both know that many of their users are just going to go to a place where free speech is allowed and comedy is legal, probably somewhere like Twitter, or X. Now, of course, before the end of Nazi Germany, Nazi ideology and fascism was not just centered there. This ideology had already begun spreading pre-1945, as there were many groups that either mimicked Nazi aesthetic or ideology, or were just deeply sympathetic to it even before Hitler fully took power. The Brazilian Integralist Action Group, or AIB, was founded in 1932. However, they were fascist and not racist, as they claimed to be open to Jews and people of color, ironically. And their motto was God, fatherland, and family, like if you mashed Mussolini with televangelism. And they claimed to be ultra-nationalist, anti-communist, and militaristic, and despite the Nazi-esque vibe, they didn't push anti-Semitism like Hitler did. In the United States, you'd have the Silver Legion of America, or Silver Shirts, that was founded in 1933, and they were basically Nazi fanboys with a side of cosmic woo-woo, as their leader, William Dudley Pelley, was a spiritualist who claimed to talk to the dead. And the group combined fascism with New Age mysticism, anti-Semitism, and Aryan supremacy. This group would be banned in 1941 after Pearl Harbor. The British Union of Fascists would be founded in 1932 by Sir Oswald Mosley, and they were initially more like Mussolini-style fascists, but by 1934 and 1935, they had absorbed full-blown anti-Semitism and became a Nazi-aligned hate group. And Mosley was one of the UK's top fascists until he was arrested during World War II while trying to get the British to surrender to Hitler. You'd have the Iron Guard in Romania that was formed in 1927. They were an ultra-nationalist Orthodox death cult. They mixed Christianity with fascist violence, as they were not just anti-Semitic. They murdered Jewish politicians, held pogroms, and were obsessed with martyrdom. And the Nazis love these guys. You also have the Lapua movement in Finland in 1929, as they organized marches, kidnapped political enemies, and even tried to overthrow the Finnish government in 1932. And they failed. You'd have the National Socialist Dutch Workers' Party in 1931. These guys were basically just budget Dutch Nazis. They wanted the Netherlands to become part of the Third Reich. The German-American Bund formed in the 1930s. These people were, quote, friends of New Germany, and began having parades, making Hitler portraits in youth camps, and they would actually have a rally at Madison Square Garden in 1939. Yeah, that was these guys. The National Socialist Workers' Party of Denmark formed in 1930. They were just Nordic Third Reich cosplayers. The Imperial Fascist League in 1929 in the UK. But yeah, there were a lot of these, and I wanted to highlight these groups pre the fall of Nazi Germany just to show that fascism and Nazism wasn't just some fad. Like, this was a complete political movement, and these groups themselves would set the frameworks of what was needed to properly organize other like-minded individuals at the time. But yeah, now I want to do a separate video on the Nazi parties. They got some nice fits. So I've got this list in chronological order, and we're going to be starting post-fall Nazi Germany, so after 1945. And our first group we're going to be talking about is the Union Movement. And the Union Movement was a far-right political party founded in the United Kingdom in 1948 by Sir Oswald Mosley, as we talked about, also seen here in this picture next to Mussolini. He was the former leader of the British Union of Fascists and used this as a rebranded post-war effort to revive his political influence. Drawing from fascist and corporatist ideologies, Mosley envisioned a hierarchical European government with national and local autonomy, seeing it as the natural continuation of British historical unity. And despite Mosley's attempt to cloak the Union movement in more democratic rhetoric, the party retained authoritarian and anti-democratic tendencies. Its overt anti-Semitism and inflammatory rallies, particularly in Jewish communities, led to violent clashes with anti-fascist groups like the 43 Group, and despite early street mobilizations and some localized electoral results, the party failed to actually achieve national traction. The Socialist Reich Party was a neo-Nazi political party founded in West Germany in 1949 by Otto Ernst Remer, Fritz Dorls, and Gerhard Kruger after their expulsion from the German Right Party. And it swiftly became a haven for former Nazi party members and sympathizers, all promoting Holocaust denial, Nazi revisionism, and the belief that Grand Admiral Karl Donitz was the last legitimate German head of state. Backed by prominent Nazi figures like Hans Ulrich Rudel and adopting fascist-style structures such as the Reichsfront, the group sought to legitimize themselves as the Nazi Party's true successor, and they would espouse views that included re-annexing former German territories and enacting a final solution of the Jewish question. Despite poor national performance, they would secure significant regional success in the 1950s, winning over 400,000 votes in the 1951 elections, earning 16 seats in the Lower Saxony and 8 in Bremen, before being banned in 1952 by the Federal Constitutional Court due to its explicit neo-Nazi ideology and anti-democratic objectives. The National Renaissance Party was an American neo-Nazi organization founded in 1949 by Kurt Mertig and soon led by James H. Maydahl. And emerging from earlier fascist groups like the German-American Bund and the Animist Party, they positioned themselves as a spiritual successor to the Nazi movement, drawing its name from Adolf Hitler's last will and testament and operating out of New York's Yorkville neighborhood. While never a mass movement, estimates of its membership range from fewer than 50 to several hundred, and the party maintained a public presence through inflammatory demonstrations, violent clashes, and the publication of its ideological journal, the National Renaissance. It advocated for white supremacy, anti-Semitism, opposition to democracy, and extreme racist policies like the forced repatriation and sterilization of Black Americans. Notably, Dan Burroughs, one of the leaders of their security echelon and also affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan, will commit suicide in 1965 after he was exposed as Jewish by the New York Times. The group regularly incited violence in New York during the 60s and 70s, and members would be arrested for plotting racially motivated riots at White Castle restaurants, and their homes would be found to contain weapons, explosives, and Nazi literature. However, no charges were filed against the members. The party would begin to fade in the 70s, and Maydahl would die of cancer in 1979. The Naumann Circle was a clandestine post-World War II organization composed of former high-ranking Nazis who sought to infiltrate West Germany's democratic political landscape and lay the groundwork for a potential return to power. Founded and led by Werner Naumann, who was Joseph Goebbels' former deputy and named successor as Reich Minister of Propaganda, the group operated in the early 1950s and focused its efforts on subverting the Free Democratic Party as well as the smaller German Party and the all-German bloc, seeing these centrist and right-leaning parties as viable vessels for reintroducing nationalist and fascist ideologies into mainstream politics. And in 1953, after extensive surveillance and wiretapping, British occupation authorities arrested Naumann and several of his top lieutenants. However, his criminal charges would be later dismissed in 1954 due to insufficient evidence, and the group itself would disintegrate. The National Socialist Workers' Party of Iran, better known as SUMKA, was a neo-Nazi political organization founded in the early 1950s by David Moncizadeh, a former SS officer and professor deeply influenced by Nazi ideology. SUMKA adopted overt Nazi symbolism, including black shirts and swastikas, and they used an emblem arranged similarly to the Nazi flag. They attracted a small base of nationalist youth, especially in Iranian universities, and maintained a reputation for violent street tactics, most notably through its assault group of around 100 paramilitary members who regularly attack supporters of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and the Communist Tudeh Party, including raids on the Soviet Cultural Center and Hungarian Trade Office. SUMKA would also align with General Fazlollah Zahedi during the lead-up of the 1953 coup against Prime Minister Mohammed, participating in demonstrations and acting as enforcers on behalf of the Shah's interest, most notably Operation Ajax, which was this Iranian coup, was funded by the CIA, and following its decline, SUMKA would leave a lingering legacy among fringe elements of Iranian youth, especially online, where neo-Nazi sympathizers continue to advocate for its revival, reportedly including family members of Moncizadeh himself. And while there are no formal neo-Nazi parties in Iran today, SUMKA remains a dark and curious historical footnote in Iran's post-war political landscape. The White Citizens Council, later being renamed the Citizens Council of America, was a network of white supremacist, segregationist organizations founded on July 11, 1954 in Indianola, Mississippi as a direct backlash to the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education ruling that mandated school desegregation. Led by Robert B. Patterson, the councils grew rapidly across the Deep South, amassing around 60,000 members at their peak, often including prominent community members such as businessmen, judges, law enforcement officers, and politicians. The Citizens Council functioned openly, pushing segregationist ideology through lobbying, propaganda, publishing racist children's books and newsletters, and broadcasting radio and television programs like the Citizens Forum. The council's primary agenda was preserving white supremacy through the maintenance of racial segregation and black disenfranchisement, and they spearheaded efforts to block voter registration drives and promote economic retaliation against civil rights activists and ordinary black citizens, including firing workers, boycotting businesses, calling in mortgages, and cutting off credit. While publicly claiming to reject violence, the council often incited or were complicit in racially motivated attacks and killings, such as the assassination of NAACP leader Medgar Evers by council and KKK member Byron Della Beckwith, whose legal defense would also be funded by the organization. And politically, they wielded immense power in southern legislatures and received public funding through state agencies like Mississippi's State Sovereignty Commission, which funneled tax dollars and intelligence gathering to support them. They also founded private segregationist academies to resist school integration, although their power began to decline after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, though they maintained significant influence into the 1970s and transitioned into the Council of Conservative Citizens in 1985, or more famously known as our favorite group, COC. The Nordic Realm Party was a Swedish neo-Nazi political party founded in 1956 by Göran Assar Oredsson under the original name National Socialist Combat League of Sweden. Modeled explicitly after Hitler's National Socialist movement, the party maintained a paramilitary wing called the Realm Action Group, which was responsible for several politically motivated crimes. And during the 1970s, Oredsson briefly stepped down to write his autobiography, and leadership would be assumed by his wife, Vera Oredsson, who became Sweden's first female party leader. They would also publish far-right magazines such as Nordic Struggle and the Sun Wheel, and attempted to enter mainstream politics by running in the 1973 parliamentary elections, receiving only a few hundred votes, and the party would linger on political fringe for decades before eventually dissolving in 2009. The Tacuara nationalist movement, founded officially in 1957, though active since 1955, was a far-right neo-Nazi and ultranationalist Argentine youth movement deeply rooted in Catholic nationalism and Orthodox Peronism. Heavily inspired by fascist ideologies, they espoused anti-Semitism, anti-communism, anti-liberalism, and anti-democratic values, advocating for Catholic supremacy and violent insurrection. Comprised mostly of young bourgeoisie males, especially from Buenos Aires, they attracted followers nationwide and was known for their paramilitary street-style violence, including attacks on Jewish students students, leftist groups, synagogue bombing, cemetery desecration, and anti-Jewish graffiti, which escalated after they were particularly upset about the capture of Adolf Eichmann while he was hiding in Argentina, who was one of the major organizers of the Holocaust. And the movement would fracture in the early 1960s as some members shifted towards revolutionary leftism and others joined or founded guerrilla groups, while hardliners veered towards collaboration with Argentine intelligence and future death squads. The White Defense League, or WDL, was a British neo-Nazi political party founded in 1957 by Colin Jordan after splitting from the League of Empire Loyalists due to disagreements over anti-Semitism and racial exclusion. They published black and white news and the Nationalist, promoting anti-Semitism and anti-immigration rhetoric, while openly admiring Adolf Hitler and Nazism. Now, this group was arguably more cruder and racially extreme than groups like Oswald Mosley's Union Movement, and they became notorious for their involvement in the 1958 Notting Hill race riots, that being nightly marches through immigrant neighborhoods in collaboration with racist teddy boy gangs and violent attacks on black communities. It was also widely suspected, though never proven, that the murder of Antiguan immigrant Kelso Cochran was committed by this group. In 1959, they joined forces with John Bean's National Labor Party in rallies like Stop the Colored Invasion, eventually merging in 1960 to form the British National Party, laying the foundation for future far-right movements in the UK. The National States Rights Party was founded in 1958 by Edward Reed Fields and led by J.B. Stoner, and was a white supremacist political organization rooted in anti-Semitism, racism, and a staunch opposition to racial integration and the civil rights movement. Emerging from Knoxville, Tennessee, and later headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama, they aligned themselves with the Ku Klux Klan and other far-right groups, publishing the inflammatory Thunderbolt newspaper and donning uniforms featuring the Wolf's Angel-inspired Thunderbolt symbol. And though less overtly neo-Nazi than the actual American Nazi Party, their rhetoric included Holocaust denial and admiration for Adolf Hitler. The party actually fielded presidential candidates in 1960 and 1964, that being Orville Faubus and John Casper, but of course they garnered little to no support. And affiliated members of this group would be linked to violent acts, including the 1958 Atlanta synagogue bombing and the 1965 racially motivated murder of Willie Brewster. And the party's decline would accelerate in the 1970s as Fields became more involved with the Klan, and J.B. Stoner would be convicted of church bombings, and Fields' eventual expulsion in 1983 left the organization leaderless, and by 1987, the group had largely disintegrated. The American Nazi Party, founded in 1959 by George Lincoln Rockwell in Arlington, Virginia, was a neo-Nazi organization that modeled itself explicitly on Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party, initially using Nazi uniforms, swastikas, and the slogan Sieg Heil. Originally named the World Union of Free Enterprise National Socialists, or WUFINS, it was rebranded as the National Socialist White People's Party in 1967 in an effort to Americanize and broaden its appeal, and switching its rallying cry to white power. George Lincoln Rockwell, who gained brief national attention through paid college speaking gigs and a Playboy interview, would eventually be assassinated in 1967 by a former member of the group, John Patler, and his successor, Matt Cole, would shift the organization to a more esoteric, mystic strain of neo-Nazism and named it the New Order in 1983. Under Cole, the group would become increasingly marginalized due to their internal schisms, financial strain, and law enforcement scrutiny, and they would also be linked to violence, including participation in the 1979 Greensboro massacre, where 5 protesters were murdered by this group and Klan members. And they would move their headquarters from Arlington to Wisconsin, where they operated from a remote compound called Nordland. And they would rebrand under their current leader, Martin Kerr. And they're still in existence to this day. The United Klans of America, founded in 1961, based in Alabama, and led by Robert Shelton, was the most violent Ku Klux Klan faction during its peak in the 60s and 70s, having around 20 to 30,000 members across the South. They were responsible for or linked to numerous acts of racial terrorism, including the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham that killed 4 young black girls, the 1965 murder of civil rights activist Viola Liuzzo, and the 1981 lynching of Michael Donald in Mobile. Their brutal campaign against civil rights progress was disseminated through its newsletter, The Fiery Cross, and reached its apex in states like North Carolina, but its support sharply declined following federal investigations and high-profile convictions. And in 1987, the SPLC would sue this group for its role in Donald's lynching and won a $7 million judgment that bankrupted the organization. Colonia Dignidad was a secluded and sinister German-Chilean settlement founded in 1961 in central Chile by Paul Schaefer, a fugitive German preacher and former Nazi. Posing as a utopian commune, the colony operated with heavy surveillance, barbed wire fences, armed guard, and brutal authoritarian control, while secretly functioning as a cult and a paramilitary hub that was aligned with Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. Schaefer, revered as the permanent uncle, segregated families, banned sexual relations, enforced hard labor, and sexually assaulted numerous children while maintaining ties with ex-Nazis. They also collaborated with Pinochet's secret police, serving as a torture and execution site for political dissidents where hundreds were detained, tortured, and executed, some buried in mass graves or disposed of in the ocean. And Schaefer also allegedly assisted with the production of sarin gas and illegal arms, maintaining weapon caches, and experimenting on prisoners in coordination with the secret police's bioweapons division. Despite decades of credible allegations, they would operate unimpeded due to political protection from Chilean far-right elites. And even after Pinochet's fall, the group would resist accountability until Schaefer fled in 1996, and he would be finally captured in 2005 and would die in prison in 2010. The White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, a particularly violent and secretive Klan faction, emerged in Mississippi and Louisiana in 1963 under the leadership of Samuel Bowers, emerging following a split from the original Knights of the Ku Klux Klan after allegations of financial mismanagement and the resignation of Imperial Wizard Roy Davis. By 1964, this group had grown to around 6,000 members and controlled, quote, claverns in over half of Mississippi's counties. The White Knights themselves will be responsible for numerous acts of terrorism, including bombings, beatings, and murders during the civil rights movement, most notably the 1964 abduction and killing of civil rights activists James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. Bowers had targeted Schwerner due to his work encouraging black voter registration, and the activist would be intercepted, kidnapped, and murdered with the help of local law enforcement and Klan members, with their bodies buried under tons of dirt at a construction site. Indictments and convictions would follow years later, as Bowers and Deputy Cecil Price would be convicted among 6 others in 1967, and despite its decline, the White Knights continue to exist with at least 3 active groups still identified in Mississippi as recently as 2017, and yeah. The National Democratic Party of Germany, or NPD, officially renamed Die Heimat, or the Homeland, in 2023, is a neo-Nazi and ultranationalist political party widely regarded as the most significant post-World War II far-right formation in Germany. And being founded in 1964 as the successor to the German Reich Party, it attracted former Nazis and war veterans, including former Wehrmacht officer Adolf von Daden, and maintained open reverence for Nazi symbols and ideologies. The party has consistently opposed immigration, multiculturalism, Zionism, the EU, NATO, and liberal democracy, seeking to restore Germany's pre-World War II territorial claims and promote ethnically pure nationalism. Throughout its history, they leveraged economic instability, anti-immigrant sentiment, and discontent with centrist politics to gain seats in regional parliaments, though it never passed the 5% threshold federally, and despite multiple attempts to have it banned, most notably in 2003 and 2017, the German Constitutional Court allowed it to operate, albeit while acknowledging its anti-constitutional aims and citing its political insignificance and heavy infiltration by state informants. The Aryan Brotherhood, also known as the Brand, is a violent white supremacist prison gang and criminal syndicate founded in the 1960s at San Quentin State Prison. Despite comprising less than 1% of the U.S. prison population, it is responsible for an outsized percentage of prison murders, as their members are indoctrinated through violent initiation rituals like committing murder. They operate a hierarchical structure with a 12-man council and a 3-man commission overseeing their affairs, and maintains influence both inside and outside prison prison walls, engaging in drug trafficking, extortion, murder for hire, identity theft, and arms smuggling. Its members are required to be white, and they're often tattooed with shamrocks, swastikas, or 666, and adhere to mottos like blood in, blood out, and oath of lifelong allegiance. Though initially formed for racial protection, the Aryan Brotherhood's modern focus is profit, leading it to forge alliances with rival ethnic gangs like the Mexican Mafia, while maintaining hostility towards groups like the Black Guerrilla Family. And authorities continue to monitor the Aryan Brotherhood to this day, as they are one of the most dangerous and sophisticated white supremacist threats in the US prison system. Círculo Español de Amigos de Europa, or CEDADE, is a Spanish neo-Nazi organization that was founded in 1966 during Franco's regime. They began as a Wagner Appreciation Society, but swiftly transformed into an international hub for Nazi ideology and Holocaust denial. Headquartered in Barcelona with branches in Madrid and Latin America, they amassed over 2,500 members in Spain by 1985 and forged alliances with global far-right figures. They operate as a study group and a prolific publisher, producing works and collaborating with the US-based Liberty Lobby. And though it briefly registered as a political party in 1979, their political ambitions were shelved, and they reached their symbolic peak in 1989 by hosting an international celebration for Hitler's birthday. But soon after this, they suffered financial turmoil that led to their decline and eventual dissolution in 1993. The National Front, or NF, is a far-right fascist and white supremacist political party in the United Kingdom founded in 1967 by A.K. Chesterton as a merger of several small nationalist and fascist groups. Reaching its peak in the 1970s as Britain's fourth largest political party, they capitalized on rising anti-immigrant sentiment, opposition to non-white migration, and social unrest, especially in East London and the Midlands. And throughout its history, the party would advocate for white-only citizenship, forced repatriation of non-whites, racial segregation, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, Holocaust denial, and the dismantling of liberal democracy in favor of authoritarian nationalist rule. And despite internal splits and complete electoral failures at both national and local levels, they would influence the far-right landscape in Britain by spawning splinter groups like the British National Party and youth movements like Rock Against Communism, while maintaining affiliations with the neo-Nazi skinhead culture, foreign fascist groups, and even paramilitary organizations like Combat 18, which we'll talk about later. They retained strict whites-only membership, targeting immigrants and minorities as scapegoats for economic and social issues, and frequently engaged in street violence and disruptive rallies, including infamous events like the Battle of Lewisham in 1977. However, their influence would wane in the 1980s due to leadership splits and competition from the British National Party. And it would linger on political fringes, occasionally resurfacing through local defections and community council wins. The National Socialist Party of Australia, or NSPA, was a minor neo-Nazi political group founded by Ted Cawthron and Frank Molnar in 1967, and they formed as a self-proclaimed more moderate breakaway from the Australian National Socialist Party, or ANSP, and rejected the overt Nazi imagery and criminal baggage associated with Arthur Smith, the leader of ANSP. And after Smith resigned in 1968, his successor, Eric Wenberg, merged ANSP into the NSPA, which briefly unified the fragmented Australian far-right under a single banner. Now, this group attempted to participate in democratic politics, and in 1970, Cawthorn became the first openly national socialist to run for public office in Australia, receiving only 0.32% of the vote. By 1972, this group would collapse due to infighting, and the group would eventually disintegrate by the late 70s. The British movement was originally founded in 1968 by Colin Jordan as a continuation of his earlier National Socialist movement. They would become a long-standing British neo-Nazi organization known for their violent history, paramilitary activities, and ideological extremism, and although it began as a political party, it operated more like an activist and pressure group, repeatedly linked to racist violence. They openly espoused Nazi imagery and anti-Semitism, participating in elections during the late 1960s and early 1970s, although they never gained meaningful electoral support. Colin Jordan would resign in 1975 following a shoplifting arrest, which ushered in the leadership of Michael McLaughlin, under whom the movement pivoted towards recruiting violent working-class youth and aligning themselves with the skinhead culture. However, internal sabotage by Ray Hill, who acted as a mole for the anti-fascist magazine Searchlight, would lead to a split and the group's eventual collapse in 1983. The National Socialist Party of New Zealand, commonly referred to as the New Zealand Nazi Party, was a far-right political group that mirrored Adolf Hitler's Nazi ideology, with a particular hostility towards Arabs, Jews, and the baking sector. Founded in 1969 by Colin King Ansell, they would also promote social credit economics and advocated for trade relations with white minority-ruled Rhodesia, and despite contesting multiple elections, Colin received negligible support, never surpassing more than 35 votes, and the party would eventually disband in 1980, having failed to achieve any political transaction beyond its fringe notoriety. The National Socialist Liberation Front was an American neo-Nazi organization founded in 1969 by Joseph Tomasi as a youth wing of the American Nazi Party, like we talked about earlier. However, after ideological clashes and allegations of misconduct, Tomasi would be expelled in 1973 and then reformed this as a standalone group in 1974. Rejecting traditional Nazi mass politics in favor of armed revolution. With a dual structure of a legal above-ground wing and clandestine militant underground, this group included figures like Carl Hand, David Rust, and James Mason, and Tomasi's eventual assassination in 1975 led to a power vacuum, multiple arrests, and eventual fragmentation. However, member James Mason in 1982 would form the Universal Order, merging Nazi ideology with Charles Manson's worldview, and was an organization that encouraged terror with notoriety, similar to what was achieved by the Manson family at the time. However, in 1991, police would raid Mason's home in Ohio and seize pornographic photos of a 15-year-old girl, and in 1992, he would plead guilty to 2 counts of illegal use of a minor and the oriented material, and he was sentenced to a $500 fine. 3 years later, in May 1994, Mason would be arrested again and charged with 2 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor and 2 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and he would be sentenced to 3 years of incarceration before being released in August of 1999. And funnily enough, in 2021, this guy, James Mason, was designated as a terrorist by Canada, and he is only the 2nd person ever to be specifically added to the list. The National Socialist Party of America was a neo-Nazi group founded in 1970 by Frank Collin in Chicago after splitting from the National Socialist White People's Party, or American Nazi Party, like we talked about. I know it's hard to keep up. These names are very redundant, but follow along with me. I'm trying to use imagery to make sure you remember, but here we go. This group was centered in Marquette Park, and they gained notoriety in the 70s for racist demonstrations against black residents moving into white neighborhoods. However, in 1977, the city would impose a $250,000 permit fee to curb their rallies, prompting the group to shift activity to suburban areas. In that same year, they triggered national outrage by announcing plans to march in Skokie, Illinois, a predominantly Jewish suburb with many Holocaust survivors, leading to a landmark First Amendment legal battle, the National Socialist Party versus the village of Skokie, which they won. However, they ultimately marched in Chicago instead. Leadership would pass to Harold Covington in 1979, and the group would eventually dissolve in 1981. Now, I'm not a neo-Nazi sympathizer or anything. You know me. However, I would personally say, historically wise, this is probably one of my favorite groups to talk about. Their name is okay, I guess. Their symbol is a bit creative. But the thing I appreciate most about them is that they filmed damn near everything they were doing, like a whole bunch of nerds. So we have plenty of archive footage to show of them, and I like that very much. Now, the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord was a far-right anti-government Christian identity militia. The group evolved under founder James Ellison into a militant white supremacist organization operating from a 224-acre compound they called The Farm in northern Arkansas. Influenced by Aryan Nations founder Richard Butler and other prominent white supremacists, they combined paramilitary training with apocalyptic religious beliefs, preparing for a coming doomsday and waging a self-declared war on what it called the Zionist-occupied government. At its peak, they housed around 70 to 120 members, including men, women, and children, and trained over 1,500 extremists in guerrilla tactics, weapons handling, and anti-government ideology at their survival school. They had a compound known as Silhouette City that featured fortified bunkers, sniper towns, and weapons caches, including machine guns, C4, explosives, and illegal automatic rifles, and their operations included attempted infrastructure sabotage, such as a failed pipeline bombing in 1983, and murder. As member Richard Wayne Snell would be convicted of 2 homicides, including the killing of a black police officer. Tensions with the law would culminate in 1985 when over 300 federal agents laid siege to the compound, and despite the group's militant posture, Ellison surrendered peacefully after negotiations with agents. And Ellison and several top members would be convicted on weapons and racketeering charges, and would even go on to testify against the Aryan Nations leadership in exchange for early release. And after this group's dissolution, its ideology and influence would endure in Elohim City and other extremist circles, and Richard Wayne Snell would be executed on April 19th, 1995, the same day as the Oklahoma City bombing. The Western Guard Party was a white supremacist group based in Toronto, Canada, founded in 1972 as an offshoot of the far-right Edmund Burke Society, which had been created in 1967 by Don Andrews, Paul Fromm, and others. Originally anti-communist, this group shifted towards explicit racism and anti-Semitism under Andrews' leadership, especially after a failed attempt to infiltrate the Social Credit Party of Ontario in 1971. And by 1972, after being expelled from the Social Credit Group, they rebranded as the Western Guard, with Fromm departing as the organization would embrace increasingly violent tactics. And in 1975, Andrews would be imprisoned on charges including weapons and arson-related offenses, and during his incarceration, leadership would pass to fascist ideologue John Ross Taylor, who renamed it the Western Guard Party, and continued promoting hate through recorded messages, eventually leading to his conviction for hate speech and contempt of court. And the group would collapse into near total inactivity by the mid-1980s, and despite its name, never registered as a political party or ran any candidates for office. Aryan Nations was a North American neo-Nazi white supremacist and anti-Semitic hate group founded in the 1970s by Richard Gerndt Butler in Hayden Lake, Idaho, where it operated a 20-acre compound that served as its national headquarters until 2001. Influenced by the racist Christian identity theology developed by Wesley Swift, Aryan Nations combined religious fundamentalism with Nazi ideology, preaching white supremacy and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about the so-called Zionist-occupied government. And Richard Butler, mentored by Christian identity leaders like Swift, organized annual World Congress gatherings of like-minded extremists and turned the church into a hub for paramilitary training and domestic terrorist networking. In 2000, Aryan Nations would effectively be dismantled after a $6.3 million civil judgment awarded to 2 Native American victims who had been beaten by the group's security guards, and the case led to the group's bankruptcy and eventual sale of the compound, which was turned into a peace park. And their founder, Richard Butler, would die in 2004, and the group would fracture into multiple factions, some led by Charles Juba and August Kreis III, and August himself would become notorious for attempting to create an alliance with Al-Qaeda. And the FBI would officially classify Aryan Nations as a terrorist threat in 2001. Afrikaner Weerstandsbeweging, or Afrikaner Resistance Movement, is a South African neo-Nazi white supremacist and Afrikaner nationalist organization founded in 1973 by former police officer Eugene Terreblanche and 6 associates in reaction to what they saw as Prime Minister B.J. Vorster's, quote, liberal racial policies. Advocating for a separatist Boer republic known as Volksstaat, they gained notoriety during the late apartheid era for its violent opposition to reform, extreme racism, anti-Semitism, and acts of domestic terrorism, including bombings, assassinations, and attacks on black South Africans. Opposing even the apartheid government for being too, quote, moderate, the group would reach peak influence during the 1980s with thousands of members, and during the 90s they would violently attempt to derail negotiations for a democratic South Africa, infamously storming the World Trade Center during talks and participating in the failed 1994 Bophuthatswana intervention, where 3 of their own members were executed on camera in a public relations disaster. The group had also orchestrated a series of bombings during the 1994 elections, killing 20 people and injuring dozens. And despite these acts, they never actually participated in any official elections and just remained a military presence. and their founder, Eugene Terreblanche, was repeatedly involved in scandals, including a suit over an alleged affair and convictions for violent assaults before being murdered in 2010. And though their influence waned after apartheid, they continued to exist in the 2000s and 2010s, maintaining a small but persistent presence through social media recruitment, public rallies, and reviving rhetoric. Creativity, originally founded as the Church of the Creator by Ben Klassen in 1973 in Florida, is an atheistic, white supremacist new religious movement that espouses white separatism, anti-Semitism, anti-Christianity, and scientific racism, defined by its slogan, Rahowa, or Racial Holy War. Creativity promotes the belief that the white race is nature's pinnacle and calls for its survival and expansion. The movement holds anti-theistic views, dismissing belief in any deity or afterlife, instead promoting racial immortality through procreation and legacy. And Klassen's foundational texts denounce Christianity as a tool of Jewish manipulation, and also condemns non-whites using slurs and proposes racial loyalty as the ultimate virtue. Creativity teaches that Jews are conspiring to enslave other races and dilute white genetic purity. Klassen himself would eventually commit suicide in 1993 amid legal and financial turmoil. The creativity movement would then splinter into groups like the World Church of the Creator, led by Matthew Hale, who would later be convicted of soliciting a judge's murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison, where he remains to this day. The Order of the Nine Angles, or ONA or O9A, is a clandestine, transnational, satanic, and neo-Nazi extremist network that emerged in the United Kingdom in the late 1960s. It's said it was officially founded in 1973, and they gained public recognition in the 1980s. The group combines elements of traditional Satanism, Hermeticism, paganism, and white supremacist ideology, including accelerationism and support for violent revolution to overthrow the Western world's liberal democratic order. Central to their doctrine is a belief in aeonic cosmology, positing that human history unfolds in a sequence of aeons led by dominant civilizations. They claim that the Western civilization has been corrupted by Magian or Nazarene, i.e., Jews and Christians, and must be destroyed to usher in a militaristic imperium. The group promotes a path of personal development known as the Sevenfold Way, which requires members to engage in transgressive, taboo-breaking acts including criminal behavior, military infiltration, and human sacrifice as a means to spiritual and social evolution. This group has no central leadership and functions through a decentralized network of autonomous cells, or nexions, which operate globally in regions including the US, Europe, Russia, and Australia. And scholars and law enforcement widely believe that David Mamet, a British neo-Nazi and jihadist sympathizer, is the synonymous founder, or also known as Anton Long, though David himself denies this. Governments, watchdog groups, and law enforcement agencies, including the US and the UK, have called for its designation as a terrorist organization due to its documented links to murders, plots, and child abuse, making it one of the most dangerous esoteric fascist movements in the modern era. And you remember that kid that we talked about that killed both of his parents and planned to assassinate Donald Trump to save the white race? This is the group that kid claimed to be affiliated with. Elohim City is a private, isolated religious compound in Adair County, Oklahoma. It was founded in 1973 by Canadian-born Robert G. Millar, a former Mennonite preacher and influential figure in the Christian identity movement, which was a white supremacist theology that was embraced by many far-right extremist groups. Spanning 400 acres and housing up to 100 residents, most of whom were Millar's descendants, the community has long drawn scrutiny from law enforcement for its ideological leanings and connections to domestic terrorism. Elohim City served as a hub for various white supremacist and neo-Nazi figures and organizations throughout the 80s and 90s, including members of the Order, Aryan Nations, and Aryan Republican Army, several of whom lived on site while engaging in criminal activities such as bank robberies to fund white nationalist causes. The compound was also linked to the Oklahoma City bomber, Timothy McVeigh, who made a phone call to Elohim City shortly before the 1995 attack. Despite its past associations with extremism and violence, Elohim City remains existing and active, though some now view it as a merely secluded religious enclave. The National Alliance, founded in 1974 by William Pierce in West Virginia, was a neo-Nazi, white supremacist political organization that emerged from the remnants of the National Youth Alliance and ultimately drew from the youth base of George Wallace's 1968 presidential campaign. Now, William Pierce, a former physics professor and author of the Turner Diaries, a very popular novel among neo-Nazis, led the group to become the most financially successful white nationalist organization in the US, having around 2,500 members and generating around $1 million annually by 2002. However, internal scandals would plague the group, including William Pierce's arrest for assault and later member Kevin Alfred Strom's conviction for possessing child pornography in 2008. And after Pierce died in 2002, the alliance would fracture under the leadership of Eric Gliebe and Sean Walker, with membership and funding sharply declining due to infighting. But yeah, today they're largely seen as defunct. The National Socialist Movement, or NSM, was once one of the largest neo-Nazi organizations in the United States, and it was founded in 1974 in St. Paul, Minnesota by Robert Brannan and Clifford Harrington, emerging from splinters of the American Nazi Party. The group promoted white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and anti-LGBTQ ideology, seeking to establish a white ethno-state. Under longtime leader Jeff Schoep, who would eventually assume leadership in 1994, the group grew in visibility by staging provocative rallies and engaging in street-level extremism, but their ranks were plagued by scandal, including leadership ties to Satanist groups, multiple members being arrested for rape and child molestation, and violent incidents like a 2005 Toledo riot and 2016 Sacramento riot. And a major legal and reputational collapse would follow in its role in the deadly 2017 Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, for which it would be later found liable for civil conspiracy. And Jeff Schoep would leave the group in 2019, transferring control to black civil rights activist James Hart Stern in an unusual twist, hoping to dissolve or repurpose the group for anti-hate education. However, neo-Nazi Bert Colucci disputed Stern's leadership and took over the group himself, and Bert Colucci would be repeatedly arrested for hate crimes and violence. And by 2024, the group would dwindle to around a few dozen members, with rallies regularly attracting more counter-protesters than supporters. The National Socialist League was a neo-Nazi organization composed exclusively of gay men in the United States, founded in 1974 by Jim Cherry, but soon taken over by Russell Vey, a Los Angeles-based neo-Nazi who financed the group through his printing business and distribution of Nazi propaganda films such as Triumph of the Will. This group was notable for blending homosexuality with fascist ideology, promoting the belief that gay Aryan men were destined to be the militant and cultural vanguard of the white race. And they combined standard Nazi rhetoric with homoerotic imagery of SS soldiers, emphasizing what they called the sexual trip, and they generated controversy by attempting to secure a place in the Los Angeles Gay Pride Parade, however were ultimately denied in 1977, and they would officially disband in 1984. The Nazi lowriders, also known as NLR or The Ride, are a neo-Nazi white supremacist prison and street gang operating primarily in Southern California, though their influence has spread to other states like Nevada, Arizona, and Florida. Emerging in the 1970s from the California Youth Authority as a skinhead gang affiliated with the Aryan Brotherhood, they would rise to prominence in the 1990s when a crackdown on the Aryan Brotherhood allowed them to expand their own control behind bars and in the streets, maintaining alliances to the Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood, and fellow white gangs like Public Enemy No. 1, and they quickly established themselves as one of the most violent and organized white gangs in the nation. Notably active in drug trafficking, especially methamphetamine, and involved in extortion, robbery, weapons trafficking, and murder. While the Nazi lowriders claim a white supremacist ideology, the gang ironically allows some Hispanic members with, quote, acceptable lineage as long as they exhibit loyalty to the white race and hatred towards black people and, quote, race traitors. And though many of its senior members are incarcerated, they remain one of the most dangerous white supremacist criminal organizations in the United States. The Patriotic Popular Front was a Finnish neo-Nazi party founded by Pekka Satonen, known for blending Nazism with occult and esoteric influences. They also maintain international connections with U.S. neo-Nazis like David Duke, J.B. Stoner, and Matthias Kohl, and cooperated with the Order of the Flemish Militants. And after incidents involving letter bombs and Nazi uniform parades, the party would be banned in 1977. And Pekka Citoyen would respond by founding the National Democratic Party, which continued publishing propaganda and Holocaust denial from its own press. The Rhodesian White People's Party was a short-lived neo-Nazi political party founded on January 30th, 1976 in Bulawayo by 30 former Rhodesian Front members, including British National Front member Kenneth Roger. This group sought to combat communism, liberalism, and, quote, international Zionism, and the group distributed Nazi propaganda, harassed Jews, and participated in anti-Semitic incidents that led to its eventual ban in 1976. The November 9th Society is a British neo-Nazi group founded in 1977 by Terry Flynn and later led by Kevin Quinn. Initially functioning as a pressure group, they became more politically active under Kevin Quinn, and they ended up running 2 candidates in the 2007 UK local elections with minimal success, and they espouse a platform advocating for white supremacy, Holocaust denial, anti-immigration, repatriation, anti-communism, and a state control of media and banking while opposing homosexuality, abortion, and foreign aid. And despite attempts to position themselves as a serious nationalist force, their influence has remained marginal to this day. The National Association for the Advancement of White People is a white supremacist organization founded in 1979 by former Ku Klux Grand Wizard David Duke as a mere publicly palatable offshoot of the Klan, attempting to rebrand a white nationalist ideology under the guise of, quote, equal rights. While initially attracting many disillusioned Klan members, the NAAWP was widely regarded as simply the Klan without robes, promoting anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ+, and anti-minority sentiments under the pretense of opposing reverse racism. Leadership would pass from Duke to Paul Allen in the 1990s, then to Reno Wolf by 1998, who attempted to distance the group from Duke and its extremist image and continued to promote white victimhood. At its peak, they operated dozens of regional chapters, including internationally, but the group declined rapidly by the early 2000s. The Free German Workers' Party, or FAP, was a neo-Nazi political party in Germany that was founded in 1979. And initially insignificant, they gained traction when national activist neo-Nazi leader Michael Kühnen would encourage his followers to join the group FAP. And by 1987, the party had around 500 members and experienced modest growth following German reunification. However, internal strife would ensue after Michael Kühnen's homosexuality would become public, leading to the rupture and departure of many members who would form splinter groups of their own. And the group would eventually decline and ultimately be banned in 1995. The Aryan Brotherhood of Texas is a white supremacist and neo-Nazi prison and street gang established around 1981 within the Texas prison system following desegregation and the collapse of the building tender system. And despite sharing a similar name, it is completely unaffiliated with the older Aryan Brotherhood founded in California. This group quickly became one of the most dangerous prison gangs in Texas, absorbing smaller white gangs and waging bloody wars against rivals such as the Mandingo Warriors, and even fought with the Aryan Circle and Texas Mafia. Its members have been responsible for numerous murders, both inside and outside of prison, including the infamous 1985 prison stabbing of Calvin Massey and the racially motivated post-9/11 killing spree by Mark Anthony Stroman. And they have an estimated 3,500 to 2,600 members, all of whom are mostly in Texas prisons, and the gang is deeply involved in organized crime, including meth distribution, extortion, and murder for hire. The National Rebirth of Poland is an ultranationalist far-right political party in Poland with strong neo-fascist and neo-Nazi tendencies, known for their anti-Semitism, homophobia, and use of shock tactics to gain media attention. Founded in 1981 as a nationalist youth group and formally registered as a political party in 1992, they participated in various elections between 2001 and 2011, however not gaining that many votes, and maintained visibility through incendiary campaigns such as distributing posters with slogans like fascism "We are worse," in launching openly homophobic efforts, during which its members have publicly chanted, "Gas the queers." The party's symbols and rhetoric mirror those of Nazi Germany, and their members have been involved in racist and anti-Semitic vandalism, including attacks on Roma centers, Jehovah's Witness facilities, and international organizations have identified them as a violent anti-Semitic extremist group, while domestic Polish institutions have intermittently investigated but largely failed to hold it accountable for hate speech and incitement. The National Socialist Japanese Workers' Party is a fringe neo-Nazi political organization in Japan led by Kazunari Yamada, a Holocaust denier who openly praises Adolf Hitler and the September 11th attacks on his blog and website. The party garnered brief notoriety when photos emerged of Yamada posing with prominent Japanese politicians Sanai Takaichi and Tomomi Inada, both of whom denied any affiliation or support, and founded on the platform of ultranationalism and anti-Semitism. They campaign against perceived Jewish influence in global and domestic politics, advocating for the expulsion of visa overstayers and economic refugees, promoting a anti-capitalist, anti-communist ideology, and calling for the abolition of Japan's imperial monarchy, which it claims is controlled by international, quote, Jewry, and seeks to restore the shogunate as the Japanese equivalent of the Nazi Führer principle. They're also anti-Korean, anti-Chinese, and anti-American. Like I said, they deny the Holocaust and systematically downplay or outright denies numerous crimes committed by Imperial Japan during World War II, including atrocities such as the Nanking Massacre, the Manila Massacre, and the human experimentation of Unit 731. The British National Party is a far-right, fascist political party in the United Kingdom, led by Adam Walker and headquartered in Wigton, Cumbria. They were originally founded in 1982 by John Tyndall, who had previously led the neo-Nazi National Front. This group served as the unification point for various extreme right elements and adopted a heavy nationalist, racist, and anti-immigrant ideology rooted in ethnic nationalism and biological racism. Under John Tyndall's leadership, they were openly neo-Nazi, promoting Holocaust denial, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jewish control over global systems, and advocating for the compulsory removal of non-whites from Britain. Their party engaged in street marches protected by the paramilitary group Combat 18, and eventually John Tyndall would be ousted in 1999 as Nick Griffin would rise to leadership, modernizing the party's message, shifting from overt neo-Nazism to Islamophobia and ethno-pluralist rhetoric, which rejected multiculturalism while maintaining a commitment to white racial purity and opposing race mixing. They enjoyed a surge of support during the 2000s, gaining dozens of local council seats and one seat in the London Assembly and 2 members of the European Parliament, making it one of the most electorally successful far-right party in British history at the time, and probably more successful than all the parties we talked about previously, except for the OG Nazi party. Their platform opposed immigration, interracial relationships, LGBT rights, feminism, and liberal democracy, favoring a strong state led by an executive prime minister with autocratic powers. Of course, this party has faced strong backlash from the public, media, political establishment, and anti-fascist groups. And following Nick Griffin's removal in 2014 and a massive collapse in membership and vote share, it would become electorally irrelevant and remain largely inactive to this day. White Aryan Resistance, or WAR, is a white supremacist and neo-Nazi organization in the United States, founded and formerly led by Ku Klux Klan Grand Dragon Tom Metzger. They were incorporated as a business and expanded into Canada in 1993. Following his failed 1982 Senate campaign, Metzger abandoned electoral politics and founded this group first as the White American Resistance and then the White Aryan Resistance to reflect a more explicit revolutionary stance. And by the late 1980s, they gained international attention through Metzger's public access cable show, Race and Reason, where he interviewed fellow extremists, Holocaust deniers, and pro-segregationists. In 1988, they branded themselves as openly white and racist, encouraging skinheads to join and calling for the racial cleansing of non-white populations in America. That same year, 3 white supremacists affiliated with the East Side White Pride, also reportedly influenced by war propaganda, beat Ethiopian student Mulugeta Serra to death in Portland, Oregon. In response, the SPLC sued Tom Metzger and his son, John, in a civil case that won a $12.5 million judgment, bankrupting the Metzgers, but not officially halting the group's operations, as they continued publishing propaganda and transitioned online in the 90s, with Metzger maintaining a small role in far-right organization until his death. The Order, also known as the Silent Brotherhood, was a violent neo-Nazi terrorist group that operated in the United States between 1983 and 1984, founded by white supremacist Robert J. Matthews, with the goal of igniting a white revolution that would topple the U.S. government. And their hopes were to lead to the extermination of Jews, black people, race mixers, and other perceived enemies. Heavily inspired by the racist novel The Turner Diaries, the Order was composed of radical elements drawn from various hate groups such as the Aryan Nations and the Covenant Sword and Arm of the Lord, and they raised funds through armed robberies, including a $3.8 million armored car heist, and distributed the proceeds to other white supremacist organizations like the National Alliance. They also bombed a synagogue in Idaho, ran a counterfeit operation, and detonated bombs in various areas to distract police from their actual robberies. Most notoriously, on June 18, 1984, members of this group murdered Jewish radio host Alan Berg outside of his Denver home. And in December 1984, after one of their members, Tom Martinez, turned informant for the FBI, authorities would track Robert J. Matthews to Whidbey Island in Washington, where he died in a standoff and fire with federal agents, becoming a martyr for many white nationalists. And key members would receive lengthy prison sentences for their roles in Alan Berg's murder, while others faced RICO charges, and the group would disintegrate. The American Front is a white supremacist and neo-Nazi organization founded in 1984 in San Francisco by Bob Hike, initially modeled after the British National Front, which we talked about. And this group targeted the punk subculture with the nationalist, anti-communist propaganda, and they would become notorious for vandalism, assaults, and harassment of minorities and leftists, leading to increased media and police attention. As Hike himself embraced Nazism, he alienated many early skinhead supporters, but eventually attracted a more radical, ideologically committed group, expanding their base beyond skinheads to include rural white workers and heavy metal fans. By 1988, this group had linked up with Tom Metzger's White Aryan Resistance, or War, holding a White Workers' Day March in San Francisco and launching an Aryan Warrior tabloid. And in the 90s, they maintained a presence through rallies and literature distribution, including a telephone hotline. Hike would relocate to Portland, Oregon, where they became involved in local activism and joined the standoff at Ruby Ridge in 1992 to support Randy Weaver. And their violence and arrest would continue into the 2000s, and in 2011, their leader at the time, David Lynch, would be murdered in Sacramento. And in 2012, one of their Florida cells, led by Marcus Fela, would be busted for paramilitary training and plotting a race war, leading to him and 12 others being arrested, though he only received a 6-month jail sentence. Golden Dawn is a Greek neo-Nazi ultranationalist criminal organization that began as a far-right political party and rose to prominence during Greece's 2009 financial crisis. It was originally founded in 1985 by Nicholas Makaloliakos and emerged from the publication of a Nazi-themed magazine and later formed into a political movement, pushing for a return to a military dictatorship, idolizing figures like Adolf Hitler and Greek junta leaders. They openly embraced fascist aesthetics and ideology, promoting racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and ultranationalist territorial ambitions, including the formation of a Greater Greece. They would actually gain seats in parliament in 2012 and became the third largest party in 2015. However, they rapidly declined after their members would be implicated in numerous violent crimes, including the murder of anti-fascist rapper Pavlos Fiasas and Pakistani immigrant Shahzad Lukman, as well as dozens of assaults on migrants, leftists, and LGBTQ individuals. And in 2020, after a lengthy trial, their leader, Nicholas, and other senior leaders will be convicted of running a criminal organization, with 18 other former MPs among those found guilty of murder, attempted murder, and orchestrating violent attacks. The Council of Conservative Citizens, or one of our favorites, also known as COC, Founded in 1985 and headquartered in Missouri, is a white supremacist organization that promotes white nationalism, segregationist ideology, and far-right paleo-conservative values under the veneer of traditional conservatism. They emerged from the ashes of the segregationist White Citizens Council of the 1950s, which we talked about, and the group openly opposes interracial marriage, immigration by non-Europeans, homosexuality, and what it views as a federal overreach by enforcing civil rights legislation. Led by figures like Earl Holt III and associated with white nationalist spokesmen like Jared Taylor and Paul Fromm, they maintain connections with other far-right groups, and despite claiming to oppose racism, the group's platform reflects overt white supremacist beliefs, describing God as the, quote, author of racism, and God opposing race mixing, and publishing inflammatory rhetoric about black on white crime. In 2015, the group would come under national fire after mass shooter Dylan Roof would cite their website as a major influence in his radicalization and racist worldview prior to the Charleston Church massacre. And though Koch condemned the attack, they also simultaneously defended Dylan Roof's, quote, legitimate grievances. And they remain active today with their leader, Earl Holt, who has also financially supported various GOP figures, contributing to pro-Trump PACs, albeit prompting several politicians and other organizations returning or rejecting his donations. The Aryan Circle is a white supremacist neo-Nazi prison gang founded in 1985 by Mark Gaspard in the Texas Department of Corrections as a violent splinter from the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, which had begun focusing on more religious doctrine than criminal activity. Determined to retain its identity as a criminal enterprise rooted in white supremacy, they positioned themselves in opposition to African American and Hispanic prison gangs, expanding throughout the 1990s to become Texas' second largest prison gang by 2008, with confirmed operations in federal facilities in multiple states. Members, of course, required to prove their loyalty through violent assaults and pledge allegiance to the gang's 4 pillars: brotherhood, solidarity, loyalty, and dedication. And most of their activities include widespread methamphetamine distribution and violent crimes. Despite their shared ideology, the Aryan Circle has actually engaged in deadly conflict with rival white supremacist gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood, and they remain one of the most dangerous groups when it comes to extremist prison networks. The White Patriot Party is a white supremacist paramilitary political group rooted in Christian identity theology and Ku Klux Klan ideology, and was founded by Fraser Glenn Miller Jr., who spearheaded its evolution from the Carolina Knights of the KKK to the Confederate Knights, and eventually the White Patriot Party by 1985. Active during a time of economic hardship in North Carolina, they gained traction by blaming Jewish bankers for local woes and amassed membership as high as 3,000 people. The group became increasingly radical, culminating in a 1987 declaration of war by Miller against what he called the Zionist-occupied government, in which he incited violence against black people, Jews, LGBTQ+ individuals, and federal officials. His open call for bloodshed, combined with his violation of legal injunction against paramilitary activity, led to his arrest in Missouri, where authorities uncovered a vast cache of explosives, firearms, and ammunition. And in exchange for a lighter sentence, he became an FBI informant, testifying against other white supremacists and serving 3 years in federal prison. Miller would eventually resurface in the 2000s, continuing to spread anti-Semitic, racist, and homophobic propaganda through his writings, and his extremism culminated in the 2014 Overland Park shootings in Kansas, where he murdered 3 people outside of a Jewish community center and retirement home, all of whom were Christian. During his trial, he insisted on representing himself and issued bizarre rants, and was ultimately convicted and sentenced to death in 2015, and he would die in prison in 2021. Public Enemy Number 1 is a white supremacist street and prison gang that was founded around 1986 from the hardcore punk scene in Long Beach, California, and later entrenched itself in Orange County. The gang, which has strong ties to the Aryan Brotherhood and Nazi lowriders, is notorious for its involvement in identity theft, methamphetamine trafficking, fraud, murder, and other violent crimes. And by the 1990s, they were recruiting white suburban adolescents, and members will be commonly identified by tattoos or acronyms such as PANI, PDS, or 737. And they would become subject to multiple major law enforcement operations, including Operation Stormfront in 2010, which resulted in the arrest of 50 white supremacist gang members. Despite these crackdowns, the gang remains one of California's most powerful and fast-growing white supremacist organizations. Blood and Honor is an international neo-Nazi music promotion network and far-right extremist group founded in the UK in 1987 by Screwdriver frontman Ian Stewart Donaldson as a breakaway from the National Front's White Noise Club, which he accused of exploiting the white power music scene for political gains. They organized white power concerts featuring rock against communism bands, sold neo-Nazi merchandise, and published the Blood and Honor magazine. In their infamous 1992 Battle of Waterloo concert clash with anti-fascist protesters would bring international attention. However, after their founder, Donaldson's death in a car crash in 1993, the group would splinter and form international branches across Europe, North America, and Australia. Many of these chapters, including in Spain, France, Canada, and Russia, have been banned for inciting hate and terrorism, while some are linked with more militant groups like Combat 18. And in 2025, the UK government would actually freeze Blood and Honor's assets, citing their involvement in terrorism and recruitment. And although its influence has waned, the group still organizes secret gigs and maintains a presence online and abroad. The Hammerskins, also known as Hammerskin Nation, are a prominent neo-Nazi skinhead organization that was founded in Dallas, Texas in 1988, originally emerging from the Confederate Hammerskins and inspired by the fictional fascist group depicted in Pink Floyd, The Wall. Known for promoting white power rock music through affiliated bands and concerts like Hammerfest, they quickly expanded internationally with chapters across Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Brazil, and they have a history of encouraging recruits to join the military to acquire combat training for an anticipated race war. And although the group claims to not orchestrate violence, many of its members have been convicted of hate crimes, including Wade Michael Page, who committed the 2012 Sikh temple mass shooting in Wisconsin, and the group's influence remains significant in the US and abroad despite factional splits and bans, and their concerts continue to draw attention and condemnation. However, their online presence has declined in recent years, but most of the legacy persists through underground networks and extremist music scenes. Russian National Unity, also known as the All-Russian Civic Patriotic Movement, was a neo-Nazi organization founded in 1990 by Alexander Barkashov, following a split from Pamyat, and they promoted a platform of Russian ethnic supremacy under the slogan, Russia for Russians and Compatriots. The group also called for the expulsion of Jews, South Caucasians, Central Asians, and other minorities, while advocating for privileged political status for ethnic Russians. Despite Alexander Barkashov's rejection of the, quote, Nazi label, they adopted a swastika-like emblem, wore black paramilitary uniforms, and conducted training through its armed wings, and actually revered Adolf Hitler. They would gain traction during the collapse of the Soviet Union, peaking around 20,000 to 25,000 members by 1999. And of course, members would be involved in hate crimes, including grave desecrations and actual murders. And although it was briefly registered as a patriotic youth club, Moscow would eventually ban the group in 1999. Barkashov would lose control by 2000, and the organization would eventually disintegrate. American Renaissance was founded in 1990 by Jared Taylor and published by the New Century Foundation, and it's a white supremacist website and former magazine that promotes pseudoscientific racism, white nationalism, and so-called race realism. Despite Taylor's attempts to present a polished intellectual front for racist ideology, the publication has long-standing ties to overtly white supremacist and neo-Nazi figures and organizations, including David Duke, Don Black, the Council of Conservative Citizens, and the Pioneer Fund. Their publication has faced repeated deplatformings, including bans from Twitter and YouTube for hate speech violations, and they have also courted controversy through alleged associations with mass shootings such as the 2011 Tuscan attack. And it's argued that the American Renaissance represents a dangerous intellectual facade for modern-day white supremacy, playing a central role in spreading racially charged conspiracy theories and attempting to legitimize bigotry under the guise of academic discourse. The New Triumph Party was a far-right, neo-Nazi political party in Argentina founded by Alejandro Biondini in 1990. This group described itself as the militant and electoral arm of Argentine National Socialism and pushed an openly neo-Nazi ideology including the belief that Adolf Hitler foresaw Argentina as the future base of Nazism, and it became known for pioneering its use of the internet to spread anti-Semitic propaganda through its online publication, Libertad de Opinión. And the party consistently failed to gain legal recognition due to their fascist orientation, but still attempted to participate in elections. And ultimately, the Argentine Supreme Court would ban the party on March 17th, 2009. Tsagaan Khas is a Mongolian neo-Nazi organization founded in 1990 by Aryan Brotherhood during the country's transition from socialism to a market economy. This group is known for their overt admiration of Adolf Hitler and Nazi symbolism, though its leaders claim to reject Hitler's extremism and atrocities while supporting his nationalist ideology, stating that the reason that they chose neo-Nazism is because, quote, what is happening here in Mongolia is like 1939, and Adolf Hitler's movement transformed his country into a powerful country. Members dress in Nazi-style uniforms, use the swastika, and perform the Sieg Heil salute, and the group is strongly anti-Chinese, promoting racial purity and opposing interracial relationships. And they've been accused of harassing immigrants, prostitutes, and LGBTQ+ community. And in 2014, they attempted to shift their focus from street-level xenophobia to environmental nationalism by targeting foreign mining companies for their alleged pollution and mismanagement. The Social National Party of Ukraine was founded in 1991 and was a far-right political party that espoused a combination of radical nationalism, neo-fascist, and anti-communist ideologies. Initially formed by nationalist student groups, Soviet-Afghan war veterans, and ultranationalist youth organizations, they adopted a Wolf's Angel-inspired symbol and recruited skinheads and football hooligans during the 1990s. They gained some representation in Western Ukraine's local councils. Ole Tyanybuk, a central figure in the party, was actually elected to parliament in 1998 and would take over leadership in 2004, rebranding this group as the All-Ukrainian Union, or Svoboda, in an effort to shed their extremist image. And this transformation included dropping their logo in favor of a three-finger salute and formally cutting ties with overt neo-Nazi and radical groups, although critics contend that extremist elements and ideologies remain present within the party. However, Tyanybuk has publicly denied any affiliation with fascism or National Socialism. The National Socialist Movement of Denmark is a neo-Nazi political party that traces its ideological and historical roots to the original Danish Nazi Party. And following several dissolutions and rebrandings, the current form of this group was re-established in 1991 under the leadership of Johnny Hansen, who launched a neo-Nazi radio station that would stir public controversy for airing racist content, and its state funding would be cut in 2004. This group has actually participated in local elections in 1997 and 2001, garnering less than 1% of the vote and failing to gain seats. And in 2005, they made headlines again by fielding candidates in both municipal and regional elections, the first Nazi-affiliated candidates on a regional ballot since World War II, though they again received minimal support, with 0.3% in Greve and 0.1% in Region Zealand. And despite marginal electoral results, their existence and public presence, particularly through demonstrations and media, continue to provoke national controversy in Denmark. The Aryan Republican Army, also known as the Midwest Bank Bandits, was a white nationalist terrorist gang responsible for 22 bank robberies across the American Midwest between 1994 and 1996, allegedly to fund the white supremacist movements and potentially support the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. They styled themselves as a leaderless resistance group inspired by Christian identity ideology, anti-government extremism, and the movie Point Break. Yeah, man. They adopted tactics like time heists inspired by this film, presidential masks, and decoy explosives to evade law enforcement. The group's members were also heavily involved in racist propaganda and stockpiled weapons in anticipation of a race war. And most of them would end up being arrested in 1996, with Guthrie dying under suspicious circumstances in jail. And ironically, at the time, Peter Langen, before transitioning to Donna Langen, would renounce her extremist beliefs and will be sentenced to life plus 35 years and became the first federal inmate to receive gender-affirming surgery in 2022. Combat 18 is a neo-Nazi terrorist organization founded in the UK in 1992 and is notorious for its violent white supremacist ideology and direct involvement in murder, terrorism, and hate crimes. Their group, whose name references Adolf Hitler through their numeric code, 1 being the letter A and 8 being the letter H, originally organized as a paramilitary wing of the British National Party before splintering off under leaders like Charlie Sargent and Harold Covington, and they would gain notoriety by publishing Red Watch, a magazine doxing political opponents and conducting violent attacks, culminating in the 1997 murder of fellow member Christopher Castle during an internal feud. The group would end up becoming increasingly militant, with several members arrested in sweeping raids across the UK and Ireland, and later linked to global networks including chapters in Canada, the US, Australia, and Europe. And this group would actually splinter into cells like the White Wolves and Racial Volunteer Force, while members would continue to become involved in racist attacks, bomb plots, mosque shootings, and football hooliganism. Combat 18's transnational network has made it a symbol of militant neo-Nazism, with members consistently implicated in plots involving weapons, explosives, and murder. Resistance Records was a Canadian neo-Nazi music label and propaganda hub founded in 1993 by white supremacist George Burdi. Originally based in Windsor, Ontario, and later Detroit, they promoted themselves as the soundtrack for White Revolution, distributing hate-filled music acts. However, after Burdi would be imprisoned for assaulting an anti-racist protester, he would actually renounce his extremist views, and Jason Snow, Eric Davidson, and Todd Blodgett would assume control of the label, and they would face legal turmoil in 1997 when the IRS raided their headquarters over tax issues, and they would cease Canadian operations due to hate speech prosecutions. And in 1998, it would be sold to Willis Carto and eventually taken over by National Alliance leader William Luther Pierce, who relocated it to West Virginia. And they remain one of the most infamous examples of white nationalist propaganda through music and digital media. The League of the South is a white nationalist, neo-Confederate, and white supremacist organization based in Killeen, Alabama, founded in 1994 by Michael Hill and other academics like Jack Kershaw and Thomas Woods. They advocate for the creation of an independent, Christian-oriented Southern Republic composed of the former Confederate states, underpinned by Anglo-Celtic heritage and white male dominance. It promotes succession, strict anti-immigration policies, cultural, quote, purity in opposition to federal authority, abortion, homosexuality, central banking, and most state regulations. The group is notorious for their belligerent use of Celtic mythology and pseudo-historical revisionism, calling for a Southern identity rooted in race, religion, and traditional gender roles, and even describes slavery as beneficial to African Americans. Thank you for that slavery, by the way. The League has aligned itself with alt-right and participated in high-profile white supremacist events like the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville and the White Lives Matter rally in Tennessee. And they have also celebrated Abraham Lincoln's assassination and have been designated as a hate group for their racist, anti-Semitic rhetoric and alliances with neo-Nazi and fascist organizations. Volksfront was a neo-Nazi white separatist organization founded in 1994 in Portland, Oregon by incarcerated skinheads Randall Lee Krager and Richard Arden, aiming to create an all-white homeland in the Pacific Northwest. And they would host regular events like the All Thing and memorials, and Krager, a convicted felon, openly advocated for the repatriation of minorities and disseminated Nazi propaganda while on parole. And the group also has documented ties to the Hammerskins and Blood and Honor. And the group ironically briefly attempted to join Oregon's Coalition Against Hate Crimes in 2001, but was rejected. Despite claims of nonviolence, this was widely regarded as one of the most dangerous and active white supremacist organizations on the US West Coast. The National Socialist Front was one of the largest neo-Nazi political parties in Sweden, founded on August 8, 1994, by sympathizers of the White Aryan Resistance, or WAR. It officially became a political party on April 20th, 1999, on Hitler's birthday, and they openly advocated for extreme and violent far-right policies, including the abolition of democracy, repatriation of immigrants, and the internment of communists in labor camps, and the reinstatement of the Holocaust, along with a eugenic-based policy to favor genetically healthy Nordic families. They promoted scientific racism, Holocaust denial, and white supremacy. Despite their radical goals, they never gained political traction, receiving only 0.03% of the national vote in 2006, never securing any parliamentary seats. And on November 22nd, 2008, the party would eventually disband. The 211 crew, also known as the Aryan Empire, Aryan Alliance, or Brotherhood of Aryan Alliance, is a violent white supremacist prison gang founded in 1995 by Benjamin Davis at Denver County Jail, Colorado. It was formed in response to a racially motivated attack in which Davis was beaten nearly to death by a black inmate, and this was formed as a protective deception to give the appearance of a white gang presence. Although it rapidly attracted real membership and became a functional gang, both in prison and on the streets. They would eventually absorb elements of the Aryan Syndicate and briefly rebranded as the Aryan Empire before reverting to the 211 crew. Though tied to white supremacist ideologies and Nazi symbolism, the group's racial policies have been inconsistent, as some members have interracial families and even connections to black inmates, complicating their official stance on race. Nonetheless, they have been linked to numerous crimes, including the 2013 assassination of Colorado Department of Corrections Chief Tom Clements. This killing was carried out by 211 member Evan Spencer Ebel, who first murdered a pizza delivery man to use his uniform as a disguise, and then shot Tom Clements at his front door. Evan Ebel would eventually be killed in a shootout with Texas police following a high-speed chase, and Benjamin Davis, the gang's founder, would be later transferred to Wyoming's prison system, where he ultimately died by suicide. Stormfront is a neo-Nazi white supremacist internet forum and hate site founded in 1996 by former Ku Klux Klan leader Don Black, and it's widely regarded as the first major white nationalist website, and has propagated white supremacy, anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, Islamophobia, and racist conspiracy theories, serving as a digital hub for far-right extremists. Think Club Penguin for racists. Organized as a discussion forum with subcategories ranging from ideology and revisionism to homeschooling and genetics, it also offers a dating service for pure whites. Stormfront users have been linked to numerous acts of domestic terrorism and hate crimes, including the 2011 Norway massacre and the 2009 Pittsburgh police shooting, and the site has faced bans in multiple countries and was actually briefly taken offline in 2017. The Imperial Klans of America is a white supremacist neo-Nazi paramilitary group that once ranked among the largest Ku Klux Klan organizations in the United States, with 23 chapters across 17 states at its peak in the early 2000s. It was founded in 1996 by Ron Edwards in Kentucky, where it also hosted the White Power Nordic Fest music gathering, and they identify as the, quote, sixth era of the Klan and claim constitutional protections as part of being an unorganized militia. Despite early growth, the group would be severely weakened by a $2.5 million civil judgment in 2008 after two members brutally beat 16-year-old Jordan Groover nearly to death that left him with broken bones and severe nerve damage. This ended up leading to their leader, Ron Edwards' resignation, and the group's image would be further tarnished when, in 2010, when Ron Edwards and his girlfriend were arrested and later convicted on federal drug and gun charges. By 2012, they had dwindled to only 2 chapters, though they remain technically active as of today. The Nordic Resistance Movement is a pan-Nordic neo-Nazi organization with a presence in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, and formerly an active branch in Finland before it was banned in 2020. They have officially been designated as a terrorist organization by the United States as of 2024. And they were originally founded in Sweden in 1997 by Klas Lund and other ex-members of the violent white Aryan resistance, and it evolved to a transnational fascist network promoting white supremacy, anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and anti-immigrant violence. They glorify Adolf Hitler and other fascist figures, publicly endorsing violence as a necessary part of political missions, and engaged in numerous attacks including bombings, stabbings, and assaults on refugees and anti-fascists. In Sweden, operatives have been convicted of terrorist bombings, attempted murders, and assaults, and in Finland, the group would be formally banned after repeated violent crimes including murder, and Finnish authorities would link the group to terror plots including explosives, assassination attempts, and in Norway, way, they have been involved in weapons trafficking, public disturbances, and affiliations with other extremist groups. Of course, they remain active today despite being banned in various areas, and they have repeatedly clashed with law enforcement and anti-fascists across the region, and is regarded by terrorism experts as an ideologically driven, violent extremist threat with international ambitions and ties to global far-right networks. The Soldiers of Aryan Culture is a violent white supremacist prison gang founded in 1997 in Utah by Tracy David Swayna, who was reportedly radicalized after being introduced to Aryan Brotherhood literature. Originally confined to Utah's prison system, the group expanded nationally and now operates within multiple state and federal prisons and has a structured militaristic hierarchy, requiring members to ascend by committing acts of violence, often targeting Hispanic or Black inmates. Their ideology is grounded in white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and members are often involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and arms smuggling, and violent crimes both inside and outside of prison. Major federal crackdowns would follow in 2002 for planning to bomb Jewish athletes at the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics, and they have also since been implicated in several murders and running large meth and heroin production rings to this day. The Caracas do ABC are a Brazilian skinhead gang that originated in the greater ABC region, particularly Santo André, before spreading throughout Sao Paulo and other Brazilian capitals. They follow a nationalistic and anti-communist ideology centered on the motto, God, country, and family, inspired by Brazilian integralism, and notably, the gang actually includes Black and Northeastern members, which is unusual for far-right skinhead groups. The National Socialist Underground was a clandestine German neo-Nazi terror cell, active from 2000 to 2011, and this group committed a series of racially motivated attacks, including the cold-blooded murder of 9 immigrants, mostly Turks, and a policewoman, 2 bombings in Cologne in 2001 and 2004, and at least 14 armed bank robberies. Despite the serial nature and ethnic targeting of these crimes, authorities failed to connect them, often blaming Turkish organized crimes, and their existence was uncovered following the of 2 members, Uwe Mondlos and Uwe Bonhart, after a botched robbery in 2011. One of the group's surviving members would then torch their safe house and then surrender to authorities shortly after, being convicted in 2018 of 10 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment, leading to a major national scandal that exposed gross failures within Germany's domestic intelligence agency. Nouă Dreaptă, or the New Right, is an ultra-nationalist far-right organization based in Romania, founded in 2000, that openly aligns itself with the ideology and aesthetics of the fascist Iron Guard movement of the 1930s. They proclaim themselves radical, militant, nationalist, and Christian Orthodox, advocating for the unification of Romania and Moldova, promoting a third positionist ideology that opposes both capitalism and Marxism. They're anti-globalist, anti-EU, anti-NATO, anti-LGBTQ+, anti-Roma, anti-Semitic, anti-communist, anti-abortion, and anti-Islam, and rejects multiculturalism and, of course, Western cultural influence, and really any religious belief outside of Eastern Orthodoxy. And while not fixated on the Jewish community due to its small size, the group regularly targets Roma people, ethnic Hungarians, and sexual and religious minorities, and has staged disruptive rallies, including violent protests against these people, which has led to physical assaults and calls for Romanian lawmakers to have the organization banned for continuing the Iron Guard's legacy of ethnic hatred and political violence. The Boromag, or Boer Power, was a far-right, white supremacist terrorist organization in South Africa that sought to overthrow the post-apartheid African National Congress and establish a Boer-led republic reminiscent of the 19th century Boer states that formed after the Great Trek. Identified by South African authorities as a right-wing terrorist group with white separatist objectives, this group was behind the 2002 Soweto bombings and was implicated in a broader conspiracy to launch coordinated attacks, including assassination plots and a campaign of racial violence. In early 2003, 26 members would be arrested, with law enforcement seizing over 1,000 kilograms of explosives. The group plotted to assassinate Nelson Mandela, aiming to expel Black South Africans and ignite civil unrest, and their ringleader, Mike du Toit, would be convicted of treason and sentenced to 35 years in prison, alongside 20 members who received sentences ranging from 5 to 35 years each. Keystone United is a neo-Nazi group based in Pennsylvania, and considered it as one of the most active and sizable single-state racist skinhead crews in the U.S. Founded in 2001 by 5 Harrisburg men, they expanded across Pennsylvania with chapters in cities like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Erie, and Scranton. Originally uniting white power skinheads, they gained momentum after anti-fascist opposition during a 2002 rally in York, leading to rapid statewide expansion, and they organized multiple white power concerts featuring neo-Nazi bands, and even helped coordinate Hammerfest 2003. Now being named Keystone State Skinheads at the time, they would rebrand in 2008 to Keystone United, attempting to mask their image, and despite this shift, many members have been linked to violent crimes, including racially motivated beatings and attempted homicides. And despite law enforcement scrutiny and public condemnation, the exact size of this organization remains unknown, and they continue to attempt to obscure their violent neo-Nazi roots. Jobbik, or Movement for a Better Hungary, is a Hungarian political party that began in 2003 with radical nationalist, far-right roots and gradually evolved into a self-described moderate, conservative People's Party by the 2020s. It was founded by Christian university students and gained notoriety for their anti-Semitic, anti-Roma, and anti-EU rhetoric. And throughout the 2000s and 2010s, they would court controversy, including inflammatory statements about Jews, support for Hungarian territorial revisionism, and harsh stances on minorities and LGBTQ+ rights. Despite this, they would surge electorally, becoming Hungary's third largest party by 2009 and the second largest by 2018. And under the leadership of Gábor Vona, they began a rebranding strategy around 2014, publicly denouncing their extremist image, moderating their nationalist rhetoric, and softening their Euroscepticism, and claiming to support Christian, centrist, and democratic values. The ideological shift alienated hardliners who would break away to form the more extreme Our Homeland movement. And while this rebranding can be viewed as genuine, of course, there are skeptics that dismissed it as a cynical rebranding, comparing it to a wolf in sheep's clothing. The Nationalist Socialist Society, or NSO, was a Russian neo-Nazi organization founded in 2004 by Dmitry Rumyantsev and Sergei Korotkik, advocating for the creation of a Russian nation-state based on Nazi ideology. They would operate illegally, and they would become notorious for their violent extremism. And in 2011, 13 of its members will be convicted for a series of brutal hate crimes in Moscow, including 28 racially motivated murders and over 50 assaults targeting non-Russian and LGBTQ+ individuals. Thus, most of their membership would be incarcerated and the group would disintegrate. Patrol 36 was a neo-Nazi skinhead group based in Israel, founded in 2005 and composed around 9 young Russian-speaking immigrants with Jewish roots who had settled in Israel, and led by Eli Bonite. The group modeled itself after the violent Russian neo-faction Format 18, engaging in hate crimes targeting African and Asian migrants, LGBTQ individuals, drug addicts, and synagogues, often documenting and uploading their attacks online. Their activities would spark national outrage and panic in Israel, and in 2007, 8 members would be arrested and later convicted on charges including conspiracy, assault, racial incitement, and weapons possession, receiving sentences of up to 7 years. And their very last fugitive member would be extradited to Kyrgyzstan in 2011, and the group has since disintegrated as well. The National Policy Institute, or NPI, is a white supremacist and alt-right lobbying group and think tank based in Alexandria, Virginia, led by Richard B. Spencer and founded in 2005 by William Reschneri II. Though relatively obscure in its early years, the organization gained notoriety after Spencer became president in 2011, transforming the NPI into a central hub for white nationalist metapolitics through its online platform, AlternativeRight.com. They would advocate for white identity politics, opposed multiculturalism, and framed the, quote, dispossession of white Americans as a global catastrophe. Their high-profile 2016 conference in Washington, D.C. was marked by Nazi salutes, which sparked national outrage and condemnation, and they would be banned from YouTube in 2020. They would lose their IRS tax-exempt status for failing to file tax returns, and they would face a $2.4 million judgment against it for its role in the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And they have since been inactive, and Richard B. Spencer has confirmed the group is defunct. Format 18 was a notorious Russian neo-Nazi group founded in Moscow in late 2005 by Maxim Marcinkovich, a prominent racist skinhead with ties to the National Socialist Society. They began as a far-right internet forum but quickly evolved into a hub for uploading violent propaganda, including videos promoting white supremacy, anti-immigrant sentiment, and acts of paramilitary training. Maxim and his associates became infamous for filming and disseminating brutal assaults, and in some cases, murder of ethnic minorities, immigrants, LGBTQ+ individuals, sex workers, and leftist activists. And they also sold neo-Nazi music and merchandise to fund their activities. Like we talked about, they inspired Patrol 36, and they would officially be banned in 2010, resulting in the shutdown of their website. The National Socialist Association was a neo-Nazi political organization founded in Taiwan in August 2005 by members of the online forum Taiwan Nazi, and officially registered in 2006 by 2 political science students. Despite adopting Nazi iconography, glorifying Adolf Hitler, and praising Nazi ideology, they publicly denied being neo-Nazi, claiming to blend Hitler's principles with those of Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Yat-sen, in a call for fascist dictatorship to unify China under the Republic of China, and they would gain international notoriety in 2007 following its first in-person meeting in Taichung. Lehava is a far-right Jewish supremacist organization in Israel, widely known for their extreme opposition to Jewish assimilation and interfaith relationships, particularly between Jews and non-Jews, and for its aggressive anti-Arab, anti-Christian, and anti-LGBT stances. Founded by Betsy Gopstein, this group has over 10,000 members, and they have staged hostile protests against Arab-Jewish couples, called for the public shaming of Jews renting to Arabs, and organized efforts to prevent social integration in spaces such as beaches or schools, often inciting violence and racist abuse. Its leaders and members have been arrested multiple times for hate crimes, including arson attacks like the 2014 burning of the Hand-in-Hand bilingual school in Jerusalem, and the group's founder demanded a ban on Christmas, calling Christians vampires, and referred to LGBTQ+ activists as terrorists. And though criticized by civil society and liberal Jewish organizations, they would operate with relative impunity until 2024, when the United States sanctioned Lehava and Gopstein, declaring it the largest violent extremist organization in Israel. The Ryno-Skachevsky Gang was a violent Russian neo-Nazi group composed primarily of teenage skinheads who carried out a spree of racially motivated murders and assaults against immigrants from the Caucasus and Central Asia between 2006 and 2007. The group was responsible for a shocking wave of brutality in Moscow, with members randomly targeting ethnic minorities in public spaces. In 2010, the pair would finally be arrested after the murder of an Armenian businessman who was stabbed to death outside of his apartment, and the investigation would reveal that the duo had orchestrated and personally participated in dozens of killings, being found involved in murdering around 37 individuals, and they often filmed their attacks and posted the footage online, seeking to inspire further violence. In 2008, 7 other gang members would be convicted. Both Ryno and Skachevsky would receive only 10-year sentences of hard labor due to being juveniles at the time of their murders, and they should be getting out in a couple years. Hell yeah. The Magyar Gárda, or Hungarian Guard movement, was a nationalist paramilitary-style organization in Hungary founded in 2007 by the Hungarian Guard Association for Preservation of Traditions and Culture, and closely linked to the far-right Jobbik Party. Though unarmed, they mimicked military structure and aesthetics, and its members wore black uniforms adorned with symbols inspired by Hungarian medieval heraldry, and often participated in oath-taking ceremonies intended to evoke a patriotic loyalty. The group claimed to protect a spiritually and physically defenseless Hungary, but quickly gained notoriety for intimidating behavior, particularly towards Roma communities, prompting widespread accusations of neo-fascism and comparisons to Nazi brown shirts. Internal tensions over this association would cause several Jobbik leaders to resign in 2008, citing the party's loss of control over the Guard, and in 2009, the Budapest Tribunal legally disbanded the group, ruling that their activities violated minority rights protected by the Hungarian constitution. And despite appeals and threats to escalate the case to the European Court of Human Rights, the ban would be upheld in 2013. And in 2019, Laszlo Torzskai, a former Jobbik member, founded the Nemzeti Legio, which is widely regarded as the spiritual successor of the Magyar Gárda, and they continue its ideological legacy under a new banner. The English Defence League was a far-right, Islamophobic, street protest movement that emerged in England in 2009, and they presented themselves as a single-issue group against Islamic extremism, while frequently targeting Muslims more broadly. Founded by former football hooligans and far-right activists like Tommy Robinson, they rapidly expanded through provocative street demonstrations, anti-Islamic rhetoric, and a strong online presence, drawing primarily from disaffected young, white working-class men. While it publicly claimed to oppose only Islamic extremism and disavowed racism, in practice, its rhetoric, online discourse, and rally chants routinely dehumanized Muslims, incited violence, and advanced conspiratorial fears of Islamic takeover. It promoted nationalist, nativist, and populist ideologies, blaming immigration, multiculturalism, and political elites for England's perceived decline, while attempting to distance itself from traditional fascist groups by trying to court Jews, LGBTQ+ people, and ethnic minorities, though often as token figures. Its tactics mirrored those of older fascist groups like the National Front, involving provocative marches, often ending in clashes with police and anti-fascist counter-protesters. The group would soon decline due to internal fragmentation, criminal charges against leaders, and links to Norwegian terrorist Anders Behring Breivik and Tommy Robinson's eventual departure, and they would become largely defunct by the late 2010s. The Sadistic Souls Motorcycle Club was founded in 2010 by ex-Ku Klux Klan member Dennis Michael McGiffin after his release from prison on federal weapons charges, and is a white supremacist outlaw motorcycle gang that brands itself as the militant arm of the neo-Nazi Aryan Nations. Formally merging with the Aryan Nations in 2012, they would operate under the motto, "The Black and Silver Solution." They have established chapters across the U.S., including Illinois, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Florida, as well as internationally in countries such as Germany, Sweden, South Africa, and New Zealand. And they promote militant white nationalism and espouse the belief that forced racial integration constitutes malicious genocide against the white race. And they're active to this day. Britain First is a far-right, fascist, and neo-fascist political party and hate group in the United Kingdom founded in 2011 by former British National Party members, though most notably Jim Dowson and Paul Golding. Known for its Islamophobic, anti-immigration, and nationalist agenda, the group campaigns against what it describes as Islamization of Britain and promotes traditionalist Christian values. They gained notoriety for provocative stunts like mosque invasions and Christian patrols, often filming confrontations for social media, which helped it amass millions of followers before being banned on platforms like Facebook and Twitter for inciting racial hatred. Despite these bans, Britain First re-emerged on social platforms like Gab and eventually returned to Twitter in 2023, and they registered as a political party in 2014, but was briefly deregistered in 2017 due to administrative issues and re-registered again in 2021. Its electoral performance has, of course, been poor, often placing in last or near last in local elections and national contests, and their actions have led to legal trouble for its leaders, with Golding and former deputy Jada Franson having both been convicted of religiously aggravated harassment. And they have also been connected, ideologically if not organizationally, to extremist violence, including the Finsbury Park mosque attack and the murder of MP Joe Cox, during which the attacker reportedly shouted, "Britain First." And they have since faced widespread condemnation from religious groups, political leaders, and anti-extremism organizations. Iron March was a neo-fascist, neo-Nazi web forum founded in 2011 by Russian nationalist Alexander Stavros that operated as an international hub for violent white supremacist ideology. The site served as a breeding ground for some of the most notorious far-right extremist groups of the 2010s, including Atomwaffen Division, National Action, Antipodean Resistance, and other accelerationist terror cells, uniting extremists under a shared admiration for figures like Hitler, Charles Manson, and James Mason. Members embraced explicit fascism, anti-Semitism, racism, and calls for mass violence, and Iron March members would be involved in or linked to multiple violent attacks and planned terror attacks, including the 2017 double murder by Atomwaffen member Devin Arthurs, and the attempted mass shooting in Halifax, and the machete attack in the UK by National Action member Zach Davies. The forum would eventually shut down in 2017, possibly due to pressure from the Russian government, but its influence would disseminate into platforms like Discord, Fascist Forge, and later Telegram. The Loyal White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, formed around 2012, is a white supremacist hate group that styles itself after the original KKK and claims to advocate for a white Christian nation founded on God's word. Despite branding itself as a nonviolent, pro-white civil rights movement, they are widely known for organizing racist rallies and spreading anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, and homophobic propaganda, often under the leadership of figures like Chris Barker and Will Quigg. They would quickly gain national attention for distributing recruitment flyers across numerous states, and of course participated in the infamous Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. The group has seen multiple leadership disputes and embarrassing contradictions, including Quigg's bizarre endorsement switch from Donald Trump to Hillary Clinton in 2016, and they have a consistent track record of criminal activity, as notable members have been arrested for weapons charges and violent assaults, such as the arrest of Barker and Hagen for a stabbing indictment in North Carolina. And despite its chaotic structure and declining influence, they have managed to maintain slight visibility through persistent flyer campaigns. The Right Stuff is a neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic, white nationalist blog and podcast network founded by Mike Panovich, and it gained notoriety for promoting Holocaust denial, white supremacy, and the white genocide conspiracy theory. And their flagship podcast, The Daily Shoah, would become a hub for radical alt-right content, including conspiracy theories and vile mockery of non-white groups. Their prominence would decline sharply after its 2017 peak, including the 2017 doxing of Mike Panovich, who was revealed to have a Jewish wife and Serbian heritage, resulting in, of course, ridicule from his white supremacist followers. And in 2020, they launched the National Justice Party, a political organization led by Panovich and other alt-right figures like Joseph Jordan, which advocated anti-Semitic hiring discrimination and white nationalist policies. They would hold rallies across the US before dissolving in late 2023 after its website went offline. The Third Path is a far-right neo-Nazi political party in Germany, founded in 2013 by former members of the NDP, or National Democratic Party, and the party advocates for ultranationalism, anti-Semitism, and xenophobia, and it maintains ties with foreign extremist groups including Hezbollah, the Nordic Resistance Movement, and Ukrainian far-right factions, and they have since absorbed other banned groups and has attempted to expand into local elections and demonstrations, and of course have become known for openly racist and inflammatory rhetoric. They have maintained visibility through their provocative activism and their 10-point program rooted in neo-Nazi ideology, and it's financed mainly by donations and remains under surveillance by the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution as a threat to domestic order. National Action is a banned far-right neo-Nazi terrorist organization that was founded in 2013 by university students Alex Davies and Benjamin Raymond after the decline of the British National Party and English Defence League. Operating in a clandestine, cell-based structure and heavily influenced by Nazi ideology, they promoted anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, and called for a, quote, white jihad to purge Britain of minorities, frequently distributing propaganda at universities and organizing provocative demonstrations. They glorified Adolf Hitler, endorsed violence, and supported terrorist acts, including the murder of J.P. Cox, after which they posted only 649 more MPs to go online. And the UK would ban the group in 2016, and despite this, they re-emerged under multiple aliases, and many members have been convicted for plotting terrorist acts, inciting racial hatred, and possessing terrorist materials. The Traditionalist Worker Party was a neo-Nazi and white supremacist political party in the United States that was founded in 2013 by Matthew Heimbeck under the early banner of the Traditionalist Youth Network. They would promote white separatism, ethno-nationalism, anti-Semitism, and a white supremacist interpretation of Christianity, advocating for a white ethno-state and denouncing multiculturalism, capitalism, and liberal democracy. They sought to gain local political power and even developed chapters across the U.S. They would join the Nationalist Front coalition alongside other neo-Nazi and white nationalist groups, participating in events such as the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, and they would eventually collapse in 2018 after Matthew Heimbeck's arrest for domestic battery. The Daily Stormer is an American neo-Nazi, white supremacist, and anti-Semitic website founded in 2013 by Andrew Anglin, and it promotes a platform of Holocaust denial, misogyny, Islamophobia, racism, and support for a second genocide of Jews, positioning itself as a cornerstone of the alt-right. Known for their extreme content, it uses memes and internet culture, often mimicking 4chan's edgy style to attract younger audiences and orchestrate mass online harassment, and the site heavily features Nazi imagery, reveres figures like Adolf Hitler, and spreads conspiracy theories about Jewish control and global domination. And they actually played a central role in organizing harassment campaigns against women, Jews, journalists, and minorities, including lawsuits involving targeted harassment of individuals like Tanya Gersh, Dean Obadallah, and Taylor Dumpson, which has resulted in millions in court judgment against Andrew Anglin. And Andrew Anglin himself actually remains a fugitive from multiple court judgments and is believed to be hiding abroad somewhere. Ooh. Pegida, or Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the West, is a far-right anti-Islam political movement founded in Germany in 2014 by Lutz Bachmann, and they claim to oppose the, quote, Islamization of Europe and promote an anti-immigrant, nationalist, and populist rhetoric. They quickly gained traction through weekly rallies, especially during the European migrant crisis, and they initially claimed to be peaceful and anti-extremist. And their leadership, including Bachmann, would be plagued by scandals involving racist statements, Hitler impersonations, and of course criminal records. Their rhetoric and actions have been widely condemned as xenophobic, Islamophobic, and extremist, and they have inspired several offshoots across Germany and Europe, including Austria, Sweden, Norway, and the UK, though most groups struggled to gain lasting traction. The Rusich Group, or the Sabotage Assault Reconnaissance Group, is a Russian neo-Nazi paramilitary unit known for their extreme brutality, war crimes, and grotesque fusion of far-right, neo-pagan, and satanic ideologies. Founded by Alexei Milchikov, a self-described sadist with a history of mutilating animals, this group emerged from the Russian ultranationalist scene and first gained notoriety during the 2014 Donbass War, conducting sabotage and ambush operations with chilling cruelty, including the torture and mutilation of prisoners. Closely affiliated with the Wagner Group and the Russian imperial movement, they have recruited European neo-Nazis while promoting genocidal ideologies that call for enslaving Ukrainian women and sacrificing prisoners in occult rituals. Despite being sanctioned by the US and EU, the group remains active, and their leaders are openly anti-Christian and advocate for a radicalized, hyper-violent imperialist vision in which rape is normalized and fascist mysticism guides military action. And they have a continued presence in Ukraine, especially during the 2022 Russian invasion. Azov Brigade, originally established in 2014 as a volunteer militia during Ukraine's conflict with Russian-backed separatists, has evolved into a prominent and controversial unit within the Ukrainian National Guard. Initially formed by far-right activists and ultranationalists, they gained notoriety for their use of symbols associated with neo-Nazi ideology, such as the Wolf's Angel and Black Sun, and these affiliations led to international criticism and a US ban on providing weapons and training to the unit. However, over time, Azov has sought to distance itself from its extremist origins, officially integrating into Ukraine's military structure and emphasizing their role in defending the nation against Russian aggression, and they played a significant role in the defense of Mariupol during the 2022 Russian invasion, earning both domestic admiration and further international scrutiny for their perceived neo-Nazi ties. However, in 2024, the US would lift its weapons ban on Azov after finding no evidence of ongoing human rights abuses and neo-Nazi affiliations. The Atomwaffen Division is a violent neo-Nazi and far-right terrorist network founded in the United States in 2013 by Brandon Russell, later expanding internationally with cells in Canada, the UK, Germany, the Baltics, Italy, Spain, Argentina, Russia, Brazil, and Finland. Rooted in accelerationist ideology, the group seeks to overthrow democratic governments through terrorism, mass murder, and guerrilla warfare to establish a white ethno-state modeled on Nazi Germany. Members idolize Adolf Hitler, Charles Manson, and Osama bin Laden, promoting anti-Semitic, racist, anti-LGBTQ+, and satanic views, and frequently planning or committing acts of violence, including murders, bombings, and shootings. The group engages in paramilitary training, weapons stockpiling, and they would rebrand under multiple names like the National Socialist Order or National Socialist Resistance Front, and many members remain active through new offshoots of the group. They've been linked to several mass shooters in the US and was officially designated a terrorist organization by countries including the UK, Canada, Australia, and Germany. And law enforcement across multiple nations have arrested dozens of members, including military personnel, for terrorism, murder, weapons trafficking, and child exploitation activities. And as of today, they remain one of the most globally distributed and dangerous neo-Nazi networks of the 21st century. The Soldiers of Odin is a far-right anti-immigrant vigilante group founded in Finland in 2015 by self-declared neo-Nazi Mika Ranta, who has ties to the Nordic Resistance Movement and a prior conviction for a racially motivated assault. Established during the European migrant crisis, they claim to patrol the streets to protect citizens from, quote, Islamist intruders, though critics and watchdogs categorize this group as a hate group with white supremacist and neo-Nazi affiliations, and despite public denials of racism, internal communications reveal widespread bigotry among high-ranking members. And multiple chapters have included members with criminal records, including convictions for violent and sexual offenses. Despite early ambiguous statements from law enforcement, many government officials in Finland, Norway, Estonia, and elsewhere have condemned the group for undermining public trust and stoking xenophobia. The United Patriots Front is a far-right extremist and anti-Islam group founded in 2015 after splitting from Reclaim Australia and led by figures like Blair Cottrell, Neil Erickson, and Sherman Burgess. Based in Victoria, they opposed immigration, multiculturalism, and Islam, often engaging in provocative and violent stunts such as mock beheadings, mosque protests, and harassment of public officials. They pushed anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and harbored neo-Nazi members, with its leadership praising Hitler and promoting white supremacist ideologies. And despite efforts to rebrand it as a political party, they failed to gain traction and never achieved official status. And after the Christchurch mosque massacre in 2019, the group's social media was shut down due to links between its rhetoric and the shooter, Breton Tarrant, who had highly praised Cottrell. And though dormant since then, many of its former members would remain active in other Australian far-right circles. The Leviathan Movement is a Serbian neo-fascist and far-right political organization that originated in 2015 as an animal rights group, but later adapted extremist, xenophobic, and anti-immigrant positions under the leadership of Pavel Bihali. Initially gaining popularity through social media videos rescuing animals and exposing abusers, they gradually shifted toward political activism, forming alliances with anti-vax and nationalist movements, and despite claiming to protect animal welfare, they began targeting minorities, particularly Roma, immigrants, and the LGBTQ+ community, using violent rhetoric and vigilante tactics, including storming a refugee camp and forcibly seizing pets from families. They've been described as neo-Nazi and are accused of inciting racial and religious hatred, with multiple arrests of members for threats and assaults. And in 2023, Serbia's public prosecutor filed to ban Leviathan, calling it a paramilitary group violating human and minority rights. Vanguard America is a white supremacist, neo-Nazi, and neo-fascist organization in the United States affiliated with the Nationalist Front and rooted in the alt-right movement. Founded in 2015 in California and later led by Marine Corps veteran Dylan Hopper, the group claimed around 200 members across 20 states by 2016 and maintained a presence in various regions. They would gain notoriety after one of their members, James Alex Fields, committed the Charlottesville car attack in 2017, killing one person and injuring around 30. And after being banned from Twitter in late 2017 and losing most of its membership, the group has shown minimal activity and it has been stated as essentially defunct. White Lives Matter is a white supremacist slogan and movement that emerged in 2015 as a reactionary counter to Black Lives Matter, rooted in white nationalist ideologies and frequently used by neo-Nazis, the alt-right, and other extremist groups to recruit members, spread propaganda, and promote the myth of white genocide. The phrase has appeared at pro-white rallies and demonstrations across the United States and internationally, often accompanied by anti-Semitic or racist slogans. And violent actions have also been tied to the movement, and while the phrase has continued to draw widespread condemnation, it gained mainstream attention when Kanye West wore a White Lives Matter shirt in his 2022 Paris fashion show, of course sparking outrage for legitimizing the slogan's white supremacist origins. You know how Kanye is. Identity Europa, or American Identity Movement, was a white supremacist, neo-Nazi, and neo-fascist organization founded in 2016 by Nathan D'Amigo, a former U.S. Marine and convicted felon who became radicalized in prison after reading white nationalist literature. The group quickly rose to prominence within the alt-right, focusing their efforts on recruiting college students by distributing propaganda featuring classical European imagery and slogans designed to appeal to white identitarianism. And their infamous slogan, "You will not replace us," originated from this group and was later chanted during the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And following widespread backlash after Charlottesville, the group saw a steep decline in membership, and in 2019, after internal Discord chat logs leaked revealing plans to infiltrate Republican politics, the group would rebrand as the American Identity Movement under leader Patrick Casey, and they attempted to distance the group from their neo-Nazi image by adopting a more Americana aesthetic. But leaks, including audio recordings and further investigations, confirmed that the American Identity Movement was merely a continuation of Identity Europa. They attempted to normalize white nationalist views under the guise of conservative politics, and after intense public scrutiny and declining influence, Patrick Casey would announce the dissolution of the group in 2020. The Proud Boys is an American far-right neo-fascist organization known for promoting and engaging in political violence with ties to white nationalism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, misogyny, transphobia, and anti-immigrant sentiment. Founded in 2016 by Gavin McInnes, the group initially grew as a male-only Western chauvinist club, but evolved into a violent street gang, and they would gain major prominence following Donald Trump's stand back and stand by remark during the 2020 presidential debate, and they played a central role in the January 6th Capitol insurrection, organizing through encrypted chats, forming tactical squads, and leading some of the first breaches, with several members later convicted of seditious conspiracy. However, they were all pardoned after this by Donald Trump. They have chapters across the US and have been involved in brawls, hate crimes, COVID misinformation, and armed rallies, and Canada and New Zealand have officially designated the group as a terrorist entity, and despite leadership fractures, they remain active across the US to this day, with ongoing efforts to influence politics, push extremism, and normalize hate-driven violence under the guise of patriotism. The Antipodean Resistance is an Australian neo-Nazi hate group formed in 2016, and they use overt Nazi symbolism, including the swastika, Nazi salute, and slogans like "We're the Hitlers you've been waiting for." And they're known for distributing propaganda that is openly racist, anti-Semitic, and homophobic, targeting minority communities, including Chinese students and LGBTQ+ individuals. Their posters have threatened the deportation of international students. They've also defaced schools with racial slurs and smeared churches and universities with homophobic material. And they have reportedly held radicalization camps in remote areas, and their members operate under pseudonyms to conceal their identities. Though their numbers are small, their influence has been significant enough to prompt the National Party of Australia to ban 22 individuals linked to the group, and they've also been banned from various social media and hosting platforms and remain under surveillance by Australian authorities due to ongoing concerns about far-right extremism. Alright, I don't know how many times I'm going to have to say this, but this group is not indicative of Trump supporters, Republicans, or even people who voted for Trump. But still, there's going to be people in the comments like, "I can't believe you're calling Trump supporters neo-Nazis." No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not even saying Donald Trump is a Nazi. I'm calling MAGA a neo-Nazi group, because they have repeatedly exhibited characteristics and alliances that closely align with neo-Nazi ideology, including widespread racism, xenophobia, authoritarianism, and violent nationalism. From its inception, MAGA has attracted vocal support from white supremacist, neo-Nazi, and neo-Confederate figures, including David Duke and the organizers of the 2017 Unite the Right rally, who interpreted Trump's rhetoric about America first and immigration as a validation of their ethno-nationalist goals goals, along with making America great again, quite literally interpreting it as America being great when women, immigrants, and minorities couldn't vote and or were slaves. And the movement, of course, played a key role in inciting the January 6th Capitol attack, which was an insurrection that resulted in the death of a Capitol police officer, Brian Sicknick, and the suicide of 4 other officers in the aftermath, all while MAGA rioters waved Confederate flags and wore Holocaust-referencing shirts like Camp Auschwitz. And the MAGA-era policies on immigration have led to mass deportations, family separations, and legally dubious detentions of actual U.S. residents and citizens, one notable example being recently when a Maryland man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, was wrongfully profiled and deported to El Salvador, where he remains today separated from his family. MAGA doesn't give a shit about this. If you don't give a shit about that, you're probably a neo-Nazi, man. Sorry. These policies have reflected a racist worldview and criminalized non-white immigrants en masse, and furthermore, the movement has often engaged in delusional conspiracy thinking, including QAnon and replacement theory, reinforcing a paranoid belief that white Americans are under siege by a globalist or Jewish elite, or even minorities, which are just classic neo-Nazi tropes. And while MAGA's public face presents itself as a populist movement, their actions, alliances, and outcomes repeatedly mirror the goals of historical fascism and neo-Nazism under a modern American banner. I will repeat, I'm not saying Trump supporters, Republicans, or people who voted for Trump are neo-Nazis. I'm not saying that at all. I wouldn't even call Trump a Nazi. I have my own opinions on him. I think he's an asshole, yeah, but not a Nazi. Not yet. Patriot Front is an American neo-fascist and white supremacist hate group that splintered from Vanguard America after the 2017 Unite the Right rally and was rebranded by their founder, Thomas Rousseau, who continues to lead their group. Known for their fascist aesthetics blended with patriotic American imagery, they promote a ultranationalist ideology rooted in ethno-nationalism, anti-immigration, and authoritarianism, advocating that American identity is inherited by blood, not citizenship, and rejecting democracy as a failed system. The group has disrupted anti-racist murals, vandalized LGBTQ+ and immigrant-supporting spaces, appeared at far-right rallies, often using smoke bombs or mass marches to garner attention, and members have been arrested for vandalism, conspiracy to riot, and other offenses. In a 2022 leak of over 400 gigabytes of internal communications exposed their strategies to recruit young men, inflate perceived influence, and infiltrate local communities and media while keeping violence and weapons talk off official channels. They maintain 8 regional networks and are widely considered one of the most active white supremacist groups within the US, with a presence at events into 2025. And yeah, this is the same group, and we talk about it often, but this is the same guys that were in 2023 were found in the back of a truck that were going to riot at a pride parade. Yeah, yippee. The Goyim Defense League is an American neo-Nazi, white supremacist, and anti-Semitic hate group led by John Menadeo II, known for spreading anti-Semitic propaganda through banner drops, flyers, online content, and public harassment campaigns. Founded in 2018, they operate the video platform Goyim TV and encourage a range of extremist activities, including targeting Jewish communities with flyers blaming Jews for COVID-19, gun control, child grooming, and global conflicts. They perform stunts like projecting messages on the public buildings, including the Anne Frank House, and hanging banners with slogans like Kanye is right about the Jews, and they glorify Holocaust denial and promote racist ideologies. They celebrated the October 7th, 2023 Hamas terrorist attack on Israeli civilians, live streaming praise for the massacre and calling for similar violence in the United States, and they're identified as one of the most active anti-Semitic hate groups in America today. The Base is a neo-Nazi, white supremacist, and accelerationist paramilitary group founded in 2018 by Ronald Nazaro, a former FBI and Pentagon contractor. The group advocates for the violent overthrow of government to establish white ethno-state and engages in terrorism, military-style training, and recruitment across the United States, Canada, Australia, South Africa, and Europe. They operate through secretive vetting processes, armed hate camps, and encrypted chats to radicalize mobile extremists, and they've been officially designated as a terrorist organization by Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and the European Union. The Aryan Freedom Network is a Texas-based neo-Nazi organization with chapters in over 25 U.S. states. And rooted in white supremacist and anti-Semitic ideology, they advocate for a racial holy war and the creation of an Aryan ethno-state, requiring members to be of 100% white European ancestry. And they engage in armed paramilitary training, including shooting mannequins painted with stars of David and promoting anti-Semitic Christian identity ideology, aligning itself ideologically with groups like Aryan Nations. And they continue to spread propaganda through flyer campaigns. Yeah, and they remain active today. Yeah. 764 is a decentralized, transnational extortion and terror network with ideological ties to the neo-Nazi Satanist cult Order of the Nine Angles and classified as a Tier 1 terrorist threat by the FBI and labeled a terrorist organization by the U.S. Department of Justice, RCMP, and other international authorities. Founded around 2019, they operate primarily on platforms like Discord and Telegram, targeting children, especially those vulnerable due to mental health issues or marginalization. The group coerces victims into recording acts of self-harm, animal abuse, and sexual exploitation with the end goal of being live-streamed. They have been linked to hundreds of cyber criminals and extremists across at least 8 countries involved in child kidnapping, murder, terrorism, and mass violence plots. And arrests and prosecutions span from the US and Canada to Brazil, the UK, Germany, Sweden, Italy, and Australia. And as of 2025, the group remains active but heavily targeted by international crackdowns, with dozens of members imprisoned or awaiting trial for some of the most depraved crimes ever seen in online extremist circles. Terrorgram is a decentralized far-right neo-fascist network operating primarily on Telegram, known for promoting militant accelerationism, white supremacy, and terrorism. It serves as a propaganda and coordination hub for extremist groups like Atomwaffen Division and the Base, and they glorify mass shooters and terrorists as saints, encouraging copycat violence. And they have inspired multiple terrorist attacks worldwide, including the 2022 Bratislava shooting, the 2022 Aracruz school shootings, and the 2025 Antioch high school shooting, among others. Members circulate guides for building weapons and explosives, and some channels serve as book clubs dedicated to hate literature. And as of 2025, Terrorgram has been officially designated as a terrorist entity by the United Kingdom, the United States Department of State, and Australia. Patriotic Alternative is a British far-right fascist neo-Nazi and white nationalist hate group founded in 2019 by Mark Collett, a former British National Party figure and anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist. It promotes a white supremacist ideology centered on the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, advocating for the deportation and incentivized repatriation of non-white Britons, and has ties to the banned neo-Nazi group National Action. They have engaged in racist propaganda, Islamophobic agitation, anti-Semitic rhetoric, and anti-LGBTQ+ campaigns, and has attempted to radicalize youth through online platforms and video games. And as of March 2024, the UK has formally listed Patriotic Alternative as a group of concern under its extremist definition. Nationalist Social Club 131 is an American neo-Nazi organization founded in 2019 in eastern Massachusetts by Chris Hood, a former member of several far-right extremist groups such as the Proud Boys, Patriot Front, and the Base. And they're known for their white nationalist ideology with active cells throughout New England and claimed chapters abroad in France, Germany, and Hungary. And they have since conducted anti-immigrant demonstrations, harassed drag story events, and staged racially charged protests across Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And they remain small with estimates of around 30 to 40 members, several of whom have ties to other neo-Nazi organizations. The National Socialist Network is a neo-Nazi white supremacist political organization in Australia founded in 2020 through the merger of the Lad Society and the Antipodean Resistance, and they're led by convicted criminal and former soldier Thomas Sewell, and have carried out repeated public demonstrations promoting anti-Semitism, racism, transphobia, and anti-immigrant rhetoric. And the group, of course, uses Nazi salutes, fascist banners, and incendiary slogans like Australia for the white man to intimidate minorities and provoke public reaction. Their tactics include hijacking refugee encampments, burning images of Chinese leaders outside, and their activities have led to multiple arrests and legislative crackdowns, such as bans on Nazi salutes and widespread condemnation across the political spectrum. And while their exact membership remains unknown, they are widely regarded as a dangerous white nationalist anti-Semitic extremist group that exploits media attention, far-right grievances, and public protests to expand their reach. Hosank, officially known as the Armenian Aryan Racialist Political Movement, is a neo-Nazi ultranationalist group based in Armenia, founded in 2021 by Armenian-American Haik Nazarian, and though not officially registered as a political party, they attracted attention for their extremist activities, including a parade in 2024 where members displayed Nazi-style flags and performed Nazi salutes. They want to build a militarized Armenian ethno-state governed by a supreme leader chosen by a selectively privileged minority deemed fit to vote, and they call for the annexation of historic Armenian territories, bans on foreign investment, ownership, and media, and the institutionalization of National Socialist propaganda. Firmly opposed to liberal democracy, multiculturalism, interracial marriage, feminism, LGBTQ+ rights, Marxism, Zionism, and Pan-Turkism, the group positions themselves as defenders of the so-called Aryan race and promotes alliances only with other self-proclaimed Aryan nations. And last but not least, the Maniac Murder Cult. And the Maniac Murder Cult is a violent neo-Nazi accelerationist group that was formed around 2021 but mostly active in 2023, led by Georgian national Mikhail Chikikvishvili, and the group is classified by the U.S. Department of Justice as an international, racially or ethnically motivated, violent extremist organization that promotes mass violence, terrorism, and ethnic cleansing. Mikhail authored the group's manifesto, The Hater's Handbook, which explicitly promotes school shootings, bombings involving children, and vehicle ramming attacks. And in 2023, he was indicted in New York after being caught attempting to orchestrate a mass casualty event on New Year's Eve, in which an individual would dress as Santa Claus and distribute poison candy to Black and Jewish children in Brooklyn. Yeah. After his arrest, he also apparently bragged about previous murders, and the group has been linked to global hate networks, including 764 and the Order of the Nine Angles. And yeah, he faces time, and if convicted, he'll face up to 50 years in prison across multiple federal charges. And yeah, man, that's it. Woohoo. Yeah, that was fun. Don't be racist. Nazis are bad. Anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well, and I will catch you in the next one. I love you, bro.